Hello everyone, I am here to help you today. I know you used this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching now? Get comfortable and relax. I moved into this old house in the countryside about a week ago. I wanted a quiet place. I wanted some distance from the rush of the city. I didn't expect to find anything strange here. I planned to spend my evenings reading, cooking simple meals, and enjoying the silence that changed on my first night when I heard soft creaks above me. At first I thought it was just the wind pushing against loose boards, then I realized the sounds were more than just the wind. They were muffled thumps, scratching noises, and at times faint whispers that seemed to hang in the air. It only happened when I stayed completely still. The moment I breathed louder or shifted my weight, the noises faded. It felt like someone or something was waiting for absolute silence before moving. That was my first sign that this place wasn't as peaceful as I hoped. On my second day, I decided to explore the house more thoroughly. The realtor's paperwork showed a basic layout, and I wanted to confirm everything was in order. I walked through every room on the first floor, checking the walls, windows, and corners. Most rooms looked fine. The floors creaked a bit, the doors sometimes stuck, but that's normal for a place this old. The second floor was small. There was a master bedroom, a guest room, and a narrow hallway leading to the attic. Ladder. I pulled the cord and watched the folding ladder extend. It made a loud squeak and a small swirl of dust drifted down. I could smell damp wood and old fabric. Even before I climbed up, I went up carefully, one step at a time, because the ladder felt a bit shaky. The attic was dark and cold. The small window on the far side let in weak light. There was a single overhead bulb, but the pull chain didn't work. When I tried it, I stood there waiting for my eyes to adjust. The space smelled stale, like a closed-up closet that hadn't been opened in years. Sheets covered old furniture, an armchair with a torn seat, a small chest of drawers, a rocking chair, a couple of cardboard boxes stacked in a corner. I noticed a few spiderwebs between wooden beams. The floor looked warped in some areas. As I walked around, my footsteps echoed. I didn't see anything unusual at first. I lifted a few sheets and found old chairs inside, tables with chipped legs and missing knobs. I coughed when dust rose into the air. Then I spotted a small wooden door in the far corner. It stood at about half my height. It was set into the wall in a strange way, almost flush with the floor. The door knob was old, made of tarnished brass. I crouched down and tried the knob. It didn't move. I noticed a lock just above the knob, a simple mechanism, but the key was nowhere in sight. I checked the house's blueprint, which I had on my phone. I zoomed in on the attic layout. There was no mention of this door. The blueprint showed an empty corner, nothing else. That made me curious. I pulled a little on the door, but it didn't budge. Then right behind me, I heard my name whispered very quietly. I felt the hair on my arms rise. I turned around fast. I saw nothing but the covered furniture. The attic felt colder than before. I shook my head and told myself it was just my imagination. That night the strange noises started again. This time they felt more direct, like they were right above me. I lay in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. I could hear a steady thump in the attic, then a short scraping sound. Every time I considered getting up, it stopped. I held my breath to listen closely, and that's when I heard the whisper again. It was drawn out and soft, like a person exhaling my name through clenched teeth. I jolted up, flicked on the bedside lamp, and waited. I couldn't sleep after that, so I got dressed, grabbed a flashlight, and marched up to the attic ladder. I climbed up. The space looked the same as before, except for the feeling that everything was waiting for me. I shone the flashlight around, checking each covered piece of furniture, then moved the beam to that little door. The door was still shut. The lock glinted in the flashlight beam. I stepped closer, and when I touched the knob I thought I heard a faint warning. It sounded like my name, but I couldn't be sure. I tried to turn the knob, but it wouldn't move. My hand was trembling, my heart pounded in my chest, my mouth went dry. I forced myself to let go and back away. Then I left the attic feeling uneasy. Over the next few days I tried to ignore that door. I told myself I'd focus on simple tasks like cleaning the kitchen or mowing the small backyard. I tried to watch some TV in the living room, but the reception was terrible. I tried to read a book, but I couldn't concentrate. Each time the house grew quiet, I felt a presence above me, like the attic was aware of me and waiting for me to make a move. One evening I decided I had enough. I grabbed a small toolbox and climbed up the attic ladder. I figured I could pry the lock open. I kneeled by the door and tried a screwdriver. First the lock held. I tried a little more force, pressing my shoulder against the door. Right then I heard my name again, clearer than before. It was a single word, my name, coming from somewhere beyond that door. My hand shook, a chill ran down my back, my legs felt weak, but I forced the screwdriver into the lock, determined to open it. The lock didn't give. I switched tools. I tried a small crowbar. As soon as I wedged it under the door frame, a jolt of pain shot up my arm. It felt like I touched a live wire. I dropped the crowbar. It clanged against the floor, echoing around the attic. I could see the doorknob shaking on its own. My chest tightened and my breath came out in short gasps. I backed away. My mind was racing. I started thinking maybe I shouldn't push it any further, but curiosity got the best of me. The next day I returned with a heavier crowbar. I told myself I wouldn't stop until I broke the lock. I set up a small flashlight on a nearby crate. I positioned the crowbar at the edge of the door right next to the lock. My palms were slick with sweat. I pushed, straining my arms. The lock creaked but didn't break. I heard something inside the door click like a bolt shifting before I could push again. I felt a rush of cold air around me. It smelled like damp soil, strong enough to make my eyes water. Then I heard a louder whisper right in my ear, telling me to leave it alone. My stomach clenched. I slammed the crowbar down, hitting the lock at an angle. The entire door knob rattled. For a split second I thought it was going to give, but then the crowbar slipped, scraping the wood. I lost my balance and nearly fell. The attic floor creaked under me. I stumbled back, panting. Suddenly my vision blurred. My ears started ringing. It felt like the room was closing in on me. The door seemed to shift in my sight, almost like it grew taller. My head pounded and I had trouble focusing. I staggered toward the ladder and half slid down, leaving the crowbar and flashlight behind. My thoughts were jumbled. I wanted to get out of that attic. I felt a kind of pressure in my chest. My arms shook so much I couldn't grip the ladder rungs. When I finally made it to the second floor hallway, I slammed the attic hatch shut behind me. I locked myself in the bathroom and splashed water on my face. The ringing in my ears slowly faded. I spent the rest of that day downstairs feeling anxious. I tried to eat, but my stomach was in knots. The house felt heavier. The wooden floors seemed to groan more than before. The air felt too thick. Whenever I stopped moving, I heard faint scraping sounds in the walls. It was like the house itself was pushing back against me. That night I couldn't settle in bed. I kept tossing and turning. Around midnight I heard a loud thump overhead. It sounded like something heavy was dropped onto the floorboards. I jumped out of bed and rushed to the living room. I sat there in the dim glow of a single floor lamp, staring at the ceiling, trying to control my breathing. I decided I had to figure out what was behind that door. I was too far in to turn back. Early the next morning I gathered more tools. I found an old hammer, a stronger pry bar, and a chisel in the garage. My plan was simple: break through the wood around the lock. If I couldn't force the lock itself, I told myself I'd succeed this time no matter what I heard or felt going up that ladder. My hands were shaking the whole time, my teeth were clenched, and I could feel my jaw aching when I stepped onto the attic floor. The air felt colder than before. I noticed the flashlight was still on the floor where I dropped it. The beam had died, the crowbar rested near the door. The entire space felt cramped, like the walls had moved closer. I knelt in front of the door. I wedged the pry bar between the door and the frame. I raised the hammer and struck the bar. The sound was dull and hollow. I felt a small vibration in my arms. Then I hit it again, harder. The wood around the lock started to splinter. That's when the whispers hit me in full force. They were coming from behind the door and from somewhere above. My name repeated in different tones, some almost hissing, others low and urgent. My forehead broke out in sweat. My heart hammered in my chest. My mouth felt like sandpaper. The attic seemed to spin. My vision blurred again. My ears rang, but I kept hitting the pry bar. The wood creaked and groaned, and I could hear the lock starting to loosen. I took one more swing, putting all my weight behind it. The pry bar drove deeper, cracking the door frame. Suddenly the doorknob jerked on its own. It twisted violently back and forth. I froze. The door moved an inch, like it was being opened from the other side. A rush of cold air hit me. It smelled stale and bitter. My name echoed through the attic, not just once. It sounded like a chorus of whispers. My stomach flipped. I felt dizzy. My head was pounding. I tried to gather my strength and push the door open. The rest of the way the whispering grew louder. My arms felt weak. My throat tightened. I had trouble breathing. I remembered thinking I might pass out, but I forced my hand onto the doorknob and pulled. At first it didn't budge, then it gave a sudden jerk, like something was trying to hold it shut from inside. We struggled for a moment, me pulling it, resisting, then it flew open an inch more, just enough for me to see a slice of darkness inside before I could see any detail. Something forced the door shut again. It was powerful enough that I fell back, landing on my backside. The door slammed with a loud bang that echoed throughout the attic. I sat there on the dusty floor, panting. I stared at the door. The knob was still shaking, but it was locked again. My hands were numb. My muscles felt sore. I could barely think straight. The whispering had stopped, replaced by a deep silence. My ears still buzzed from the echoes. I tried to catch my breath. After a minute I stood up on wobbly legs and approached the door again. I gingerly tried the knob. It was locked tight. I tugged on it a little, but it refused to move. I kicked the door in frustration. It made a dull THK. No change. My frustration turned into anger. I lifted the hammer again, aiming at the wood near the lock, but then I felt that rush of cold air behind me, and my name sounded in my left ear. It was low, like someone whispering a warning. My chest tightened. I froze. My grip loosened, and the hammer slipped out of my hand. It fell onto the floor with a dull thud. I felt laded, like my body was telling me to back off. I left the attic without picking up my tools. I climbed down the ladder, slammed it shut, and paced around the second floor hallway. I felt my heart drumming in my chest. My shirt was damp from sweat. My face felt flushed. My head pounded, and my vision was still fuzzy around the edges. I forced myself to get some water downstairs. I drank a whole glass in 3 big gulps. It did nothing to calm my nerves. The house felt hostile. The hallway leading to the staircase seemed darker than usual. I heard faint thumps coming from above, as if the attic was reacting to my attempts to open that door. I didn't know what else to do. I considered calling a locksmith, but I couldn't imagine how to explain the situation. I also thought about leaving, but I didn't want to run from a house I had just moved into. Besides, something in me wanted to see what was behind that door, even if it scared me. I decided to take a break for the rest of the day. I stayed in the living room, keeping the TV on for background noise. I avoided silence because that's when I'd hear the faint scratching and whispering again. I made myself a quick meal, but I barely tasted it. My thoughts kept returning to that door in the attic. The memory of that slam and the feeling of being pushed back were fresh in my mind. My arms still felt sore from gripping the crowbar. My shoulders HDHD, my stomach was twisted in knots. I went to bed early hoping I'd sleep, but the house stayed restless. I heard random creaking in the floorboards upstairs. I heard faint tapping on the walls. At one point I sat up in bed, convinced I heard the doorknob up there jiggling by itself, but I was too drained to go check. I stayed under the covers, staring at the dark ceiling, wishing morning would come. Now I'm sitting at the kitchen table with a second cup of coffee, my hand shaking as I hold the mug. It's been exactly a week since I moved in, and I'm more determined than ever to figure this out, but the house is making every step harder. The whispering voice that calls my name has gotten louder. Each time the door itself seems like it has a mind of its own. I feel a deep chill whenever I think about pushing further. My vision goes in and out of focus and my ears ring whenever I step into the attic. I can't ignore this anymore. I don't think I can find peace until I open that door, but something doesn't want me to. The house feels heavier, like it's gathering its strength against me. I'm planning my next move. I'll get a sturdier flashlight and maybe bring my phone so I can record what happens if my vision goes blurry. I can at least point the camera at the door and see if I capture anything later. I'm also considering removing the tire door from the hinges, but that might trigger a stronger reaction. I'm scared of what might happen if I force my way inside. At this point I need answers. If I can't open it, I might end up leaving this place for good. I'm not even sure if I can sell it without disclosing what's going on up there. The house feels like it's warning me to stop, but I can't stop. I have to know what's behind that door. It's become a personal challenge. I feel it in my gut. I need to push through even if the ATCT tries to shut me out again. I'm going up there once more. I'll ignore the whispers, the cold air, and the sudden pains. I'll break that door down if I have to. I'm not leaving this unanswered. Maybe I'm stupid or reckless, but I refuse to sit here feeling watched and threatened. I'm going up there and I'm not leaving until I get that door open. If the house wants to scare me, it's going to have to try harder. I'm tired of running in circles. I'm done playing around. I'm going to face it. The next time I come downstairs, I'll have my answer, or I'll know for sure that this place isn't meant to be my home. Either way, I'm walking up that attic ladder, and I'm doing it right now. I still remember the first time I saw that place. I was out on my usual nighttime run, jogging along the deserted road that runs about a mile from my house. I didn't expect anything strange. I just wanted to blow off some steam and clear my head, but something felt off that evening. The air felt heavier than usual and my legs felt tense from the start. I kept going, figuring it was just nerves or fatigue. Then I saw the abandoned chapel. It looked like a wreck, missing its roof and covered in ivy. I'd passed it before, but that night I noticed a faint glow or movement inside. I had never seen anything like that there. I slowed down, squinted and saw a shape, transparent, kneeling near what used to be the altar. It took me a few seconds to realize it wasn't just my eyes playing tricks. I stopped a few steps from the doorway, breathing hard. The shape looked human, but it had no real features. I didn't see a face or hands. I only made out of torso, legs and arms. It didn't make a sound, and it didn't cast a shadow on the crumbling walls. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt dry. I took a few careful steps forward. My heart started pounding, and I felt the muscles in my shoulders get tight. I heard a rustling sound like dead leaves brushing against old stone. I noticed the ivy around the interior walls was twisted back, almost like Something had pushed it away from the center. I stepped on a broken piece of tile and it cracked under my foot. The figure flicked for a second, but it didn't move. I wanted to turn around and sprint back home, but I stayed. My chest felt hot and I could hear my own pulse drumming in my ears. I inched closer to the remains of the altar. I kept my eyes on that transparent shape. I got close enough to see that the ivy on the ground looked shriveled near the altar. The leaves looked limp and dark, as if drained of color. I didn't smell anything strange, just the damp odor of the old walls, but there was a slight pressure in the air around me, like I was standing near a low electrical current. It made my hair stand on end. I didn't say a word. I just stood there breathing fast, not knowing what to do. The shape shifted slightly, but it never turned to face me. I noticed my stomach muscles clenching. My skin broke out in goosebumps. Even though I was sweating from the run, I started to feel dizzy, so I backed away. Then I turned and ran back down the road. I didn't dare look over my shoulder. My footsteps on the cracked pavement sounded louder than usual, and I kept expecting something to follow me, but nothing ever did. That night I slept poorly. I kept seeing that figure in my mind kneeling there. I woke up twice, drenched in sweat, my heart racing. I told myself I was just scared from the shock, that I'd calm down in a few days. But the next evening I felt a powerful urge to go back. It was like there was a pull in my gut telling me to return to that chapel. I tried to ignore it and watch TV until past midnight, but I couldn't focus on anything. My eyes kept drifting to the clock and my foot tapped against the floor without me even noticing. Eventually I gave in. I laced up my running shoes and left my house, my mind spinning with a nervous buzz. I jogged the same route as always, and by the time I saw the chapel in the distance, my heart was hammering. My mouth felt dry again. The inside of my chest felt tight, and I kept wiping sweat from my forehead. The road was silent and dark, with only a weak moon in the sky. I slowed to a walk. When I reached the chapel, the entrance was still partly collapsed, the walls broken in sections. I saw the same figure kneeling in the same spot. I took a couple of deep breaths, trying to calm my nerves, and stepped inside once more. My shoes scraped against the uneven floor. The ivy on the walls looked even more twisted than before, as if it had been yanked away from the center. The figure's presence felt stronger this time. I don't know how else to put it. The air in there pressed against my ears. I heard a faint crackling like static electricity. I felt my hair lift slightly. My throat got tight and my knees felt weak. I stayed for about 5 minutes. I barely moved. I just stared at the shape, wondering if it would do anything. It didn't. It stayed still, as if locked in prayer or some kind of silent ritual. After a while I felt a surge of panic. My muscles tensed up. My mind was screaming at me to leave, so I ran off without a second thought. But that compulsion didn't stop. Each night I felt the same pull in my stomach. I tried distracting myself with music, phone calls, anything to keep me at home, but around the same time each night my entire body would feel restless. My thoughts would drift to that chapel. I'd picture the crumbling walls, the twisted ivy, and that kneeling shape. By the time the clock hit midnight, I'd be lacing up my shoes again. My wife asked me why I was going out so late, but I couldn't explain it well. I just said I needed fresh air. She let it go, but I could tell she was confused. The third time I went, I brought a flashlight. I walked in carefully, shining the beam on the floor in the altar. The shape was there as usual. Its outline seemed sharper than before. I saw the silhouette of shoulders and ahead. There were no eyes, mouth or nose, but the general shape was clearer. When I tried to shine the flashlight right at it, the beam seemed to pass through. I saw the old stones behind it. My hand shook so much that the flashlight jittered, making shadows jump on the walls. I heard my breathing echo in the empty space. I walked around the altar Trying to see the figure from another angle, my stomach flipped when I saw the ivy behind it. The vines had curled away, leaving a bare patch of stone. The ground was darker in that spot, like it was stained. I crouched down and touched the stone. It felt cold, almost like ice, even though the night was warm. My fingers tingled. I pulled my hand back, feeling a rush of adrenaline. My heart pounded in my head. I stood up and backed away. The figure stayed where it was, never looking at me or speaking. I don't even know if it had a face. After a moment, I left, my legs shaking. Over the next few nights, I started having dreams. They were all the same. I was kneeling at that altar, mumbling words I didn't understand. My voice sounded hollow and distant. I'd wake up gasping for air, my body drenched in sweat. I'd look at the clock and see it was just past 3 a.m. My hands would shake for a while and I'd feel my heart thawing against my ribs. I couldn't get back to sleep after that. I'd just sit in the living room staring at the floor, feeling drained. I tried staying away from the chapel for a few nights, but the urge kept getting worse. I felt a constant buzzing in my body, like I was full of nervous energy I couldn't release. I got headaches when I tried to force myself not to go. Eventually, I couldn't stand it anymore. I left the house around 1 a.m. and jogged straight to the chapel, not bothering to pace myself. When I got there, I was out of breath and drenched in sweat, my lungs HDHD, and my legs felt like rubber. But the moment I stepped inside, I felt calmer. The air still felt heavy, but the pressure in my head eased up a bit. I stood there for a long time trying to figure out what the shape was. I didn't speak out loud, but I kept thinking, "What are you?" in my head. I didn't get a response. Nothing moved except the slight flicker of that outline. After 10 minutes or so, I felt a new feeling, a tug toward the altar. I took a step forward, then another. My arms were trembling and my neck felt stiff. I got close to the altar, close enough to touch it if I wanted. The stone looked chipped and weathered. The top was covered in dead ivy. I saw more of those dark patches on the floor. I hesitated, then knelt down. My heart thumped so hard that it made my chest hurt. I placed my hands on my thighs. The figure was right next to me. I couldn't see its face, but it was right there. I tried to look at it from the corner of my eye. It made me shiver. My skin felt cold. I stayed kneeling for what felt like forever. My mind was a mess of thoughts. I didn't know why I was doing it. I didn't know what would happen next. I started breathing faster. My temples throbbed. Then I stood up, grabbed my flashlight, and rushed out. I ran all the way home, my legs burning. I locked the door behind me and stood in my hallway panting. I felt a wave of nausea. My hands were covered in sweat. I collapsed onto the couch. The rest of the night I sat there rubbing my face and trying to calm my racing heart. That ritual repeated itself every night. I dream about kneeling at the altar, her reciting nonsense words. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. wide awake and sweating. I'd finally give in around 1 or 2 a.m. the next day, run to the chapel and kneel there again. Each time the figure looked a little more solid, but it stayed transparent. Each time I felt weaker, my arms felt heavy, and I started losing energy. During the day I'd drink coffee, but it wouldn't help. My eyes felt gritty and sore. My shoulders and back HDHD. I wanted to stop, but I couldn't. The compulsion was too strong. After about 2 weeks of this, I noticed the skin on my forearms looked paler than usual. My wife asked if I was feeling sick, and I lied, telling her it was just stress. She didn't seem convinced. She asked me why I never slept well anymore. I avoided the question. I couldn't explain it without sounding insane. In my head I kept thinking maybe I should talk to someone, maybe I should get help, but every time I seriously consider it, the urge to go back to the chapel would flare up and I'd lose track of those plans. One night I decided to push through the run and stay at the chapel longer to see if anything would I got there around midnight. The moon was behind some clouds and the sky was almost pitch black. I had my flashlight, but I left it off, letting my eyes adjust. I stepped inside the chapel and felt the familiar electric tension. My chest felt tight and my heartbeat sped up. The figure was there kneeling. I approached it again, stopping at the altar. I knelt down and stayed there, trying to keep my breathing steady. My legs felt numb. After a few minutes, my heart hammered in my ears. Then I felt something like a whisper of air on my neck. I froze. I couldn't see anything, but I felt a slight pressure on my shoulder, like a gentle tap. My muscles tensed. I clenched my fists and wanted to jump up, but I stayed still. I'm not sure why my body refused to move. My chest felt like it was on fire and my temples throbbed. Then the sensation stopped and I could move again. I stumbled back, stood up and felt my vision blur. For a second I pressed a hand against the wall to steady myself. I stayed another few minutes staring at the figure. It was quiet, just like before, but the air felt alive. My mind buzzed with a chaotic mixture of fear and curiosity. I felt sweat trickle down my back. I looked around and noticed the ivy was almost completely dead on one side of the wall. The leaves were shriveled, hanging by thin, brittle stems. The ground there looked darker, almost black. I smelled something faint, like damp stone and rotten leaves. I decided I'd had enough for the night. My whole body was tense. I left the chapel, trotting back to the road, stumbling over loose rocks. I felt like something was watching me leave, but when I glanced back, I just saw the shape kneeling in the same position. The rest of the run home was a blur of cold sweat, shaky limbs, and short, ragged breaths. I kept staring into the trees, half expecting to see that shape floating behind me. Once I got home, I slammed the door and leaned against it, breathing hard. I felt that wave of nausea again, and I almost threw up. I braced my hands on my knees, trying to calm my stomach. After a minute or so, I stumbled to the bathroom sink and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror and noticed dark circles under my eyes. My skin looked grey and clammy. My head pounded with a dull ache. I didn't sleep much that night. The next few days were a haze. I went to work feeling groggy and weak. My shoulders hurt and my eyes burned when I tried to focus on the computer screen. My co-workers asked if I was feeling sick, and I just said I was tired. I drank coffee until my hand shook. I tried to skip the run, but by 1 a.m. the compulsion was too strong to ignore. I found myself jogging down the deserted road again, heading straight for the chapel. Every time I asked myself why, I drew a blank. I only knew that I had to be there, kneeling by that altar, no matter how scared I felt, and that's where I am now. Every night I go back, I kneel next to that transparent figure. I feel my body shaking. I sweat through my clothes. I sense that invisible force pressing against my chest. When I leave, I feel drained, but also strangely relieved, like I fulfilled some kind of obligation. My dreams are getting more vivid. I hear my own voice speaking gibberish in those dreams, but I don't recognize the words. It's getting worse, but I can't stop. Something is keeping me tied to that chapel, making me show up night after night. I don't know what will happen next. I only know I'll be there again tomorrow, standing in that ruined doorway, watching that same shape kneel at the broken altar. I don't think it will let me go anytime soon. I still remember the day I found that mirror. I was at a small antique bazaar, the kind of place that smells like old books and damp fabric. I had no plan to buy anything that day, but the mirror caught my eye because of its tarnished frame. It had these dull silver edges with tiny scratches and stains. I didn't see anything remarkable at first. I just thought it might look good in my apartment. I brought it home, wiped off some dust and leaned it against the wall in my bedroom until I could figure out where to hang it. I didn't feel anything strange right away. It seemed like a regular old mirror, but everything changed after a couple of nights. I noticed something odd when I was getting ready for bed. I looked at my reflection and I swear it blinked about a split second later than I did. I opened my eyes and tried to catch it again, but it looked normal. I rubbed my eyes thinking maybe I was just tired. I went to sleep and forgot about it. The next evening I caught it again. I blinked and a moment later my reflection's eyelids fluttered like it was trying to catch up. My stomach tightened and I felt a chill run up my arms. I turned off the light and left the room, but the next time I passed by I checked the mirror out of the corner of my eye. Nothing strange that time. For a while I thought maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. Sometimes I work late and I come home pretty exhausted. My mind can wander, but one morning I woke up and something felt different in my bedroom. The air felt stale and my skin tingled. I glanced at the mirror and I saw my own figure standing there, but I was still in bed. My body was shaking under the covers and my eyes were wide open, but in the mirror I looked calm, like I was just standing still looking straight at me. My stomach lurched and I felt goosebumps rise on my arms and legs. I sat up and stared at that reflection. It didn't copy me right away. It just stood there for a second. Then I saw it move. It raised its hand like it was reaching out. Then it was gone and it matched my position in bed again. My heart pounded and I started to sweat. I got up to see if there was someone behind the mirror. Of course no one was there. I decided to move the mirror out of my bedroom. I carried it to the living room and propped it against the wall near the front door. I felt relieved when I took it out of my bedroom. My plan was to return it or sell it, but I kept getting this uneasy feeling when I walked by. Every time I glanced at the reflection I swore it was looking at me with a slight delay, like there was a half-second lag. Sometimes I saw the reflection's mouth twitch before mine did. I started to avoid looking at it for too long. I tried to cover it with a towel, but the towel slipped off during the night. The next morning I found it on the floor. I don't remember taking it down. I told myself to get rid of the mirror. I even brought it out to my car with the intention of driving to a thrift store, but I got distracted by a call from work. When I came back, the trunk was open and the mirror was back inside my apartment. I can't explain how it ended up leaning against the living room wall again. I felt my throat tighten and my hands shook when I tried to pick it up again. It felt heavier than before. I started to sweat and my heart raced. I left it there and walked away. I took a shower and tried to calm down. Things only got worse. Sometimes late at night I'd sit in my living room trying to watch a show or read something on my phone, and I'd catch movement out of the corner of my eye. I'd look over and in the mirror I'd see my own shape standing behind the couch, but when I turned around there was no one there. My reflection would be in a different spot than I was in. It stood near the window or by the hallway like it was searching for something. My mouth would go dry and my heart felt like it was beating against my rib cage. I started leaving lights on around the apartment because the darkness made me feel exposed. One night I woke up in a cold old sweat. I heard a soft scraping sound coming from the living room. My immediate thought was that someone had broken into my place. I got out of bed, grabbed the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, a metal flashlight, and crept toward the noise. My legs felt weak and my chest tightened with every breath. I flipped on the living room light and I saw the mirror leaning at a different angle. It looked like it had been dragged across the floor. The faint scratch marks on the wooden boards matched the shape of the mirror's base. No one else was in the room. I thought about checking the locks on the doors, but I froze staring at the mirror. My own reflection stared back with a slight tilt of the head like it was studying me. I swear I saw the eyes shift to millisecond before mine did. I backed away, went to the door and saw that it was still locked. The windows were all locked, nothing else seemed disturbed. I tried sleeping in a hotel the next night. I needed a break from that apartment, but I couldn't stop thinking about what would happen with the mirror while I was gone. Would it move again? Would it break some furniture? Would someone else see it? My anxiety wouldn't let me sleep. I tossed and turned in that hotel bed until I gave up and checked out in the middle of the night. I drove back home with my hand shaking on the steering wheel. I felt sick, my head pounded and my eyes burned from exhaustion. When I walked back into my apartment, the mirror was in the hallway. It had moved from the living room. There were new scratch marks on the floor. I tried to ignore the fear building in my chest and told myself to focus on practical steps. I thought about throwing it out the window, but I live on the second floor and I was worried about damaging the property or harming anyone outside, so I decided to put it in the storage area in the basement. I gripped it with both hands and carried it downstairs. My arms felt numb and sweat dripped down my forehead. I placed it in a corner near some old boxes and covered it with a sheet of plastic. Then I hurried back to my apartment, locked the door and tried to catch my breath. My pulse was racing and I felt an ache in my shoulders. For 2 days I didn't see the mirror. I started to calm down a bit, although I kept thinking I heard scraping sounds in the hallway at night. On the second night I heard a thump near my door. My heart raced again. I got up and looked through the peephole. Nothing. I opened the door a crack and looked down at the floor. The old mirror rested there leaning against my doorframe. I felt my chest tighten and my vision blurred for a moment. I forced myself to pick it up and bring it inside. I felt defeated. I set it against the living room wall and sat on my couch staring at it. My reflection stared back. I tried to maintain eye contact, but it felt wrong. I sensed that it was examining me. I started having dark thoughts, nothing violent toward others, but my mind felt heavier. I found myself getting angry over small things, my phone not charging fast enough, my coffee not tasting right, the neighbors talking in the hallway. My jaw would clench and I'd want to yell at someone for no real reason. Then I'd calm down and wonder why I was so on edge. It felt like the mirror was pulling me into some kind of negative mood. My chest felt tight most of the time and I had trouble sleeping. I'd wake up every few hours, was worried that I'd see the reflection walking around my apartment again. One night I did see it. I opened my eyes and glanced at the bedroom doorway. The mirror was still in the living room, but I could see it from my bed if I tilted my head just right. The hallway light was on and my reflection stood there in the mirror. I was still lying in bed, but the reflection looked like it was leaning out of the mirror, peering around the corner into my bedroom. My arms and legs felt paralyzed. My breath caught in my throat. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The reflection's eyes turned toward me, then it stepped backward and I saw it blend back into the shape that matched my body and bed. When I finally got control of my muscles, I bolted upright, my heart pounding. I considered calling someone, but who would I call? The police wouldn't believe me. A friend might think I've lost my mind. I decided to search online for stories about mirrors. I found a few things about haunted objects, but nothing that matched exactly what I was experiencing. I didn't want to draw any attention to myself by posting on social media or online forums. I just wanted a solution. After that, I attempted a more direct approach. I tried to break the mirror with a hammer. I smashed it once, but the hammer just bounced off. There wasn't even a crack. My arm vibrated from the impact and I almost dropped the hammer. I swung again harder, but the mirror didn't shatter. The shock traveled through my hand, and I felt a painful jolt in my elbow. My reflection stared back unscathed. I gave up and sat on the floor, cradling my arm. My head HD, and I felt an overwhelming sense of failure. The next few nights I barely slept. I felt like the mirror was always in my peripheral vision. Even when I was in another room, I'd hear faint tapping or scratching sounds at odd hours. The reflection would move in ways I couldn't predict. Sometimes it blinked out of sync, sometimes it moved its head before I did. The lag between me and it seemed to get longer. It was no longer just blinking late, it was reacting to things I did a full second or two after I did them. Sometimes I'd scratch my nose and it wouldn't follow. For several heartbeats I noticed that my apartment felt colder. I felt uneasy even in the shower. I'd keep the door open, worried about what might happen if I let myself lose sight of the mirror for too long. My heartbeat stayed elevated most of the time. My shoulders were tense and my back HD from stress. I kept telling myself I'd figure out a permanent solution, but I had no idea what to do. The mirror felt like a magnet for my attention. Even when I tried to focus on something else, I'd catch myself glancing at it. My mind kept wandering back to that reflection yesterday. I tried one last time to rid myself of it. I carried the mirror outside and drove to a remote area, a stretch of land off a service road. I placed the mirror by some trees and drove away. My hands shook on the steering wheel and I kept glancing in the rearview mirror. I felt lighter for a moment, thinking I might finally escape it. That was short-lived. When I arrived home, it was leaning against my apartment door. I didn't see anyone around. I didn't see any sign of a delivery or a note. I felt a wave of nausea. I had to cover my mouth to keep from throwing up. Right there in the hallway. Now it's in my living room again, and I'm writing this because I have no other outlet. I don't feel safe in my own home. I can't relax whenever I try to ignore it. I get this sense that I'm being watched. If I look directly at it for too long, I feel this dread building in my chest. It's hard to explain, but it's like the mirror is alive. My reflection doesn't match me anymore. It moves and blinks and tilts its head on its own. It doesn't speak or make any sound, but its eyes follow me like it's studying every breath I take. I don't know what I'll do next. I've tried moving it, hiding it, even destroying it, but it seems impossible to get rid of. My mood keeps getting darker and my mind won't stop racing. I'm afraid it's only a matter of time before something even worse happens. Every time I think about leaving my apartment for good, I realize I'd never truly get away from it. Somehow it keeps finding me. I'm stuck here staring at that old mirror, waiting for the next time my reflection decides to move on its own, and I have no idea how to stop it. I never expected to see my own shadow upside down on the pavement. I was walking home in the rain, hunched forward under my jacket because the wind kept blowing water in my face. The street lights were weak and the water rushing near the curb made a constant soft roar. I tried to wipe the rain from my eyes so I could see the sidewalk in front of me. My shoes were soaked and each step made a squishing sound, but then I noticed something else. My shadow on the ground was reversed. It was like looking at my own figure flipped top to bottom. I stopped for a second and stared. The water dripped down my coat collar and I felt a chill run over my arms. I thought maybe I was just tired or seeing a reflection in the puddles. I kept walking, hoping it was a trick of the light. The further I went, the more it stayed there following me, yet inverted. My heart started to pound. I remember blinking hard a few times. The street was empty and I only heard the rain and my footsteps. Occasionally a car passed by on the main road behind me, but I was mostly alone. I looked down again and realized the shadow was moving a tiny bit before I did, like it predicted my next step. I felt the muscles in my legs tense and I slowed my pace. I wanted to see if it would slow down too. It did, but there was a strange lag in my movements. My head felt light, like I was off balance, and I had this urge to run home. The rain finally started letting up, which should have made me feel better. Instead, I noticed that my shadow stayed in place on the wet asphalt. There wasn't much direct light around, so I expected it to blur or fade. It didn't. I paused under a dim lamp and shifted my weight from foot to foot. The shadow shifted, but again with that eerie fraction of a second lead. I felt like I was in some kind of surreal film scene, except I was cold, wet and confused. I pushed on, trying to ignore it. My heart was beating hard, enough that I could feel the pulse in my ears. Each time I took a step, I glimpsed that upside-down shape flickering just ahead of me. It felt like it was mocking me with its weird orientation. My eyes darted around, and I kept checking the windows of the dark houses lining the street. I worried someone might look out and see what was happening. That idea made me anxious. I didn't want any attention on me or on this bizarre situation. I just wanted to get inside my house and lock the door. Once I made it to my front yard, I stood still for a moment, feeling the water seeping into my socks. My porch light was off. I fumbled for my keys, and as I turned the lock, I looked down again. The shadow was right there, still upside down on my walkway. It made my stomach feel tight. It defied any normal explanation. I told myself it must be some freak reflection from a passing car or some weird phenomenon from the street lights, but none of those explanations made any sense, especially now that I was off the street and the lamp was far behind me. I felt fear rising in my chest, but I tried to stay calm. When I stepped into my living room and turned on the light, I froze. The shadow was still there on the floor, upside down, as if it belonged to someone standing on their hands. I looked up at the ceiling light to see if maybe it was projecting an odd angle, but there was no direct beam that would create that shape. My body tensed and my breathing got shallow. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My entire living room was dim except for the center lamp, yet this dark shape stayed sharp on the floor. I flipped on more lights and it made no difference. The shadow didn't behave like normal shadows. It didn't stretch or shift with the angle of the lamp's eye. Took off my wet coat, letting it drop on the floor. My shirt clung to my skin. I could feel sweat mixing with the rain on my chest and back. My thoughts were spinning and I kept looking at the shadow and then away. I wanted to see if it would vanish. When I wasn't paying attention, it stayed there. It didn't matter whether I looked or not. I started to feel short of breath, like I needed more air. My shoulders ADHD from all the tension. I realized I was twisting my hands into fists, so I forced myself to relax my fingers, but I couldn't calm down. I tried walking into the hallway and flipping the light switch there. My shadow followed me, still upside down and still moving slightly in advance of my steps. My heart raced faster. I felt a jolt of raw fear each time it shifted. Before I did, I kept rubbing my eyes, trying to confirm I wasn't hallucinating. I decided I had to keep my mouth shut about this. Who would believe me anyway? I was worried that if I tried to tell someone, this thing might react. I felt like it had its own awareness. I stood in front of the mirror in my bathroom and saw nothing unusual in the reflection. My normal reflection was there, soaking wet clothes, messy hair, dark circles under my eyes. Yet when I glanced at the floor, there was the upside down shape. My stomach clenched. I noticed my hand was trembling, so I gripped the edge of the sink. My pulse felt irregular and my throat was dry. I decided to change out of my wet clothes. As I moved, the shadow glided along the carpet. It didn't match my movements in the way a shadow normally would. If I reached out with my right arm, it reached out with its right arm, but with a small head start. I can't explain how unsettling that is. My scalp prickled and I felt goosebumps on my I tried turning all the lights off, leaving the place in near darkness, but I could still make out the shape on the floor. It had its own presence, not dependent on any light source I could identify. My thoughts were racing with questions, but I had to focus on what I could control. I forced myself to act like I would on any other night. I turned on the TV to fill the space with some background noise. I tried to watch the news, but my attention kept snapping back to the shape on the floor. It was still there near the couch, upside down and sort of facing me. I sat down carefully, noticing my knees felt weak. I tried to breathe slowly and deeply. On the screen a weather report played. I barely heard any of it. I thought about calling someone, maybe a friend or an acquaintance from work, but the idea made my stomach twist. What if I said something that alerted this thing? What if it understood what I was saying and decided to do something to me? My imagination started to run wild, so I got up and walked to the kitchen to get some water. The moment I stood, the shadow moved first, like it already knew I was going to stand. My heart felt like it jumped to my throat. In the kitchen the lights were harsh and bright, yet the shadow still appeared distinct. It crossed the tiles in a steady, slightly early motion. My head HD, and I leaned against the counter. I opened the cabinet for a glass and I noticed my hand shaking again. I filled the glass with water and took a large gulp. The cold liquid helped me feel more grounded. I turned around slowly, and there it was, always there, always upside down. I needed to find a way to cope with this, at least for the night. My clothes were still damp, and I felt the weight of exhaustion on my shoulders. I decided to take a quick shower. I hoped maybe steam or bright bathroom lights would break whatever effect was causing this. I turned on the shower, let the water warm up, and caught a glimpse of the shadow near the door. It never left. It stayed in that inverted posture, moving just a fraction of a second. Before I did, I shut the bathroom door, but it slid under the crack like it was a stain on the floor, not a reflection dependent on a line of sight inside the shower. I tried to calm my mind. The hot water hit my shoulders and I closed my eyes. The rushing sound helped me relax a little. I spent a few minutes there just letting the water run over my face, but the moment I stepped out and looked at the floor, I realized it was waiting. My chest felt tight again, and I fumbled for a towel. The steam in the bathroom made the mirror foggy. I wiped it with my hand, but I couldn't see the shadow in the reflection, only the tiles behind me. When I glanced down, I almost dropped my towel. It was at my feet, still upside down. I walked to my bedroom carefully, avoiding any quick movements. I was certain it would move first if I tried to run. My shoulders were tense and every noise in the house seemed louder than usual. I heard the soft hum of the air conditioner. I heard the squeak of a loose floorboard. I even heard the faint drip of water from the shower head. I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was in control. I put on fresh clothes and sat on the edge of my bed. My throat felt dry again, and my mouth had a metallic taste. I turned my lamp on and off a few times, testing if there was any effect on the shadow. Nothing changed. It was there on the floor, upside down. If I shifted my leg, it shifted just before me. If I bent my arm, it bent too. Always a split second earlier. The hair on the back of my neck stood up each time I noticed that detail. At some point I started hearing noises I couldn't explain, whispers or maybe just the blood rushing in my ears. I heard a slight rustling like clothes rubbing together, except I wasn't moving. I jumped to my feet and I felt adrenaline surge through my limbs. My breath came in quick bursts. Then I realized the shadow was on its feet. Before I fully stood up, I felt a cold sweat on my forehead and my hands felt clammy. I went into the hallway again, flipping the light switch on and off just to see if anything would change. It was a pointless gesture, but I was desperate to understand this. The shadow followed me Gliding across the wooden floor, I heard the boards creak under my own feet, but I sensed a delay or mismatch in sound versus the shadow's movement. It was always that subtle sign that it was acting independently. I wanted to scream, but I kept it inside. I was terrified that if I showed fear too openly, it might respond. After a few minutes, I went back to the living room. The rain outside had mostly stopped, but occasional drops hit the windows. I turned off the TV and just stood there listening to my own heartbeat. A sudden rush of panic made me check the door's lock. I turned it twice, hearing the click each time. Then I pulled the curtain across the window, shutting out the view of the dark street. I paced around trying to figure out if there was any chance this would just go away on its own. The house felt too quiet. I couldn't escape the sense that this shadow had its own presence. I heard faint footsteps in the hallway behind me, but when I turned, nothing was there except the shadow on the floor. I wondered if it was mimicking the sound of steps. Just to unnerve me, my heart thumped in my chest as I stood there trying to breathe normally. I knew I had to get some sleep, but the idea of lying in bed with this thing in the room made my skin crawl. I decided I'd sleep on the couch where there was more light in case anything happened. I sat down and pulled a blanket over me. The shadow was on the floor close to the coffee table, still upside down. I placed a lamp on the side table and turned it on. The light cast short, crisp shadows on the couch and table, but the shape of my body on the floor remained inverted and independent of that light. I rubbed my arms, trying to get rid of the goosebumps. My eyelids felt heavy, but I was too scared to let them close. Every so often I heard a quiet whisper, like someone saying my name very softly. I snapped my eyes open, scanning the room. I never saw anything else, just that dark figure on the ground. My body was exhausted and my mind was drained, but the anxiety kept me on edge. Eventually I had to rest, so I let my body slump back on the couch, hugging the blanket. The entire night I drifted in and out of a restless doze. Each time I caught a glimpse of the floor, the shadow was there, never once breaking its pattern. In those half-awake moments I felt a strange sensation, like I was sharing my thoughts with something else. It was as if another consciousness was nudging me, hovering right on the edge of my mind. I fought it off by reminding myself that I had to stay alert, but I kept feeling this pressure at the back of my head, like a slow rhythmic pulse. When morning finally came, I realized I couldn't tell anyone about this. I still can't. I'm worried that if I speak the words out loud, the shadow might react in ways I can't predict. It feels like it's listening. Even now the whispers haven't gone away completely, and sometimes I catch faint echoes of footsteps behind me when I move from one room to another. I've started keeping the curtains closed. I check every corner of every room, making sure I'm alone, but every time I look down, I see that upside down figure on the floor waiting. It hasn't left for a second. Even now while I'm talking, I feel it there. I can't ignore it. It's watching every gesture, every tilt of my head, and it's always just slightly ahead of me. My stomach churns, my hands are sweating. There's no one else in the house, and I keep the doors locked. I can't risk letting a neighbor or someone drop by if they saw this, or if I tried to explain it, I might lose control of the situation. At least by keeping silent, I have some sense of control. I don't know how long I can keep living like this, but I don't see an alternative. If I try to tell someone I'm afraid, it'll hear me. If I try to ignore it, it makes more noise. I can't decide which is worse. I just know that if it decides to do more than watch, I won't be able to stop it. For now, I'm stuck in this lonely routine of caution and anxiety, hoping that maybe someday it'll leave on its own. But so far, every day ends the same way. I see that thing on the floor upside down, always ready to move before I do, and every night I lie awake trying to pretend I don't hear its Whispers. I still remember the day I spotted that painting. I walked into a small antique shop because I had time to kill. The place smelled like old furniture and damp books. The owner, an older man with grey hair, barely looked at me. I wandered around until I saw this one painting leaning against a wall near the back. The lighting was bad, but I could make out a figure of a man in a dark room. His face looked twisted by worry or fear. The detail was incredible. His eyes seemed to stare right through me. I asked the owner about it. He shrugged and said it was by some painter he'd never heard of. He named a low price. I bought it without hesitation because I liked the realism it felt different from the usual cheap, dull paintings I see at flea markets. When I brought it home, I didn't have a specific plan for where to put it. My apartment isn't big, but I have a spot in the living room above a small couch, so I hung it there. At first, it just looked like a weird old painting that gave the room a bit of personality. I even had a friend over that same evening. He glanced at it and joked about it being creepy. I agreed, but I also thought it was cool. I didn't pay much attention to it after that because I had work early the next day. A few days passed and I started noticing something odd. Every time I glanced at the painting, the expression on the man's face seemed slightly different. The first time I thought I was imagining it. I was tired from a long shift, so I figured my eyes were just playing tricks on me. But a couple of days later, I saw the man in the painting again. His face wasn't twisted in the same way. It looked more like a faint grin now. Nothing huge, just a tiny curve at the corner of his mouth. It made me uncomfortable, but I wrote it off as me looking for details that weren't really there. Then one night I came home in a foul mood. I'd had an argument with my boss and I was furious. My hands were shaking and my head pounded. I dropped my keys on the kitchen counter and went into the living room to collapse on the couch. I happened to look up at the painting. The man's face seemed twisted into something hateful. His brows were pulled down hard and his eyes looked like they were filled with anger. It felt like he was staring right at me, mirroring my rage. My throat tightened. I felt a rush of panic in my chest. I stepped closer, thinking maybe the light was playing tricks again, but the longer I stared, the more convinced I was that he looked furious. That was the exact emotion I was feeling. I grabbed a glass of water and tried to calm down, but I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd just seen. Over the next week, I started paying attention every single day. When I left for work feeling fine, the painting looked neutral. When I came home stressed or sad or anxious, the man's expression reflected it. If I was tired, he looked drained with sunken eyes and a slack mouth. If I was irritated, I saw frustration in his face. If I was genuinely depressed, he appeared sorrowful, like he'd lost all hope. After a few days, I got so on edge that I avoided looking at it. I still felt it drawing my eye, though it was almost impossible for me not to check his face whenever I entered the living room. Sometimes I tried to catch it in the ACT. I'd look quickly, hoping to see the transition or something that would prove I was imagining things, but the painting never moved. It was always still. It just looked different depending on my state of mind. By the end of that second week, I couldn't deny the pattern. If I felt good, the man looked calm. If I felt terrible, he looked worse. It wasn't some random shift of shadows or angles. It felt deliberate. That made me nervous. My heart would pound whenever I stepped into the living room. I'd feel sweat on my palms. I'd almost tiptoe past it, wishing I could put a sheet over it or hide it in a closet, but I couldn't bring myself to remove it. Part of me wanted to test the situation further. Another part of me felt like it was watching me for some reason, and that made me uneasy. I started sleeping poorly. I'd wake up several times a night thinking I heard something in the apartment. A few times I rushed into the living room flipping the light on just to make sure nothing was off, but the painting was always there. That man's eyes aimed at me, his expression shifting in subtle ways. On a Sunday morning I woke up feeling a little off. My neck was stiff and I had a dull headache. I decided to sit on my couch with a cup of coffee. I glanced at the painting. The man's face looked tense. I noticed the tightness in his jaw. I felt a wave of unease, like I couldn't relax in my own place. My stomach churned. I sipped my coffee, but I couldn't even taste it. I was too distracted. I kept staring at the painting, almost waiting for it to move or blink. My breathing grew shallow. I leaned closer, trying to see if I could find brush strokes that might change the expression under different lighting. I could see fine lines around the man's eyes, like wrinkles from stress. The detail was shockingly lifelike. I leaned back and shut my eyes for a moment, trying to steady my thoughts. The next day I had an early meeting at work, so I didn't look at the painting in the morning. I rushed out, got through my day, and came home later than usual. I was exhausted. My entire body felt heavy and my mind was numb. I threw my jacket on a chair and dropped onto the couch. When I glanced up, I saw the man's face, looking completely drained. It was like he'd been carrying some giant burden all day. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. He had heavy bags under his eyes and his mouth was downturned. The corners of his lips were pulled so low it looked pitiful. I let out a shaky breath. My heart started pounding again, and I felt a chill spreading down my arms. This was not my imagination. The painting was matching my emotions. It was like it was connected to me somehow. I tried to stay calm, but my thoughts raced. I grabbed my phone, scrolled through social media, tried to ignore the painting. Every once in a while I'd glance up. The expression never changed after that. It stayed miserable, able mirroring how I felt. Eventually I went to bed, but I kept waking up. I'd hear my heart thawing in my ears. My mouth felt dry. My skin felt clammy. Every time I drifted off, I'd see that face in my mind. Sometimes I imagined it was smiling in a cruel way, even though I hadn't witnessed that yet. But I couldn't rest. I got up once around 3 a.m. and wandered into the living room. I turned on a lamp. The painting looked normal enough, but still grim. I turned off the lamp, mumbled a curse under my breath, and went back to bed. I didn't sleep well at all. About a week later, things got worse. I was dealing with stress at work and money problems. I felt my patience slipping. I slammed doors. I yelled at a coworker who irritated me. I came home that evening furious, my ears burning. I stepped into my apartment, threw my bag to the floor, and stormed into the living room. I noticed the painting right away. The man's expression wasn't just angry, it looked monstrous. His eyes seemed to burn with rage. His teeth looked clenched. It was such a hateful stare. I felt my stomach drop. My hands began to shake and I could hardly breathe. I forced myself to look away, but I could still feel his gaze on me. My arms felt numb, my chest felt tight. I swear I could hear my own heartbeat pulsing in my head. I started pacing around the apartment, thinking I was losing it. I wanted to throw the painting in the trash, but the idea of removing it seemed risky. I'd grown attached in a warped way, almost like I needed to see what it would do next. I couldn't think of a logical explanation for what was happening. I just knew that every time I felt a strong emotion, the painting reacted. It mirrored me so perfectly that it felt like it was feeding off whatever I was feeling. It reminded me of my own reflection, but it wasn't me in the picture. I tried inviting a close friend over to see if he noticed anything, but I chickened out at the last second. I knew it would sound insane. "Hey, do you see this painting changing its expression?" That question alone would make me look unstable. I decided to keep it to myself for now. Still, my friend did come by. He stood there, looked at the painting for a moment and said it was cool but creepy. He didn't mention any changes. I forced a laugh and changed the subject. The moment he left, I felt the man in the painting looking at me with annoyance, as if it was irritated by our conversation. I stepped back, feeling my legs tremble. I left the room and shut the door behind me, but that didn't help. I could still picture those eyes. I went on like that for several days, my energy drained at work. I could barely focus. My boss asked if I was okay. I lied and said I wasn't sleeping well, which was true, but I left out the part about the painting. Every time I came home, I'd see the man's face. If I was anxious, he looked uneasy. If I was depressed, he looked crushed by sadness. My heart would race and I'd feel a knot in my stomach. I kept telling myself to take it down, but I couldn't do it. My hands would hover near the frame and I'd hesitate. Something in me refused to let it go. One night I decided I'd at least move it into my closet. I took it down from the wall. My fingers felt cold and sweaty around the edges of the frame. I stood there holding it and I looked at the man's face. He looked desperate, like he was silently begging me not to lock him away. My arms shook and I felt a surge of guilt and fear all at once. I set the painting on the couch and sat down, staring at it. My breathing was shallow. My back felt damp with sweat. I could almost sense a pressure in the room, like I wasn't alone. I couldn't go through with hiding it. After a few minutes, I hung it back on the wall. I felt relief, but also dread. This thing was controlling me, or at least it felt that way. I tried to calm myself by keeping a routine. I'd wake up, avoid the living room until I was dressed and ready to leave. After work, I'd come home, grab food, and try not to stay in the living room for long. I'd watch TV in my bedroom or stare at my phone. I'd do anything to avoid the painting, but I knew it was there. The pull was still strong. If I was in a bad mood, I'd sneak a glance, and it was always the same. The expression matched exactly what I felt. Some nights I dreamed about it. I'd see the man in the painting walking around my apartment. I'd wake up with my heart racing, my shirt soaked in sweat. One evening I forced myself to do a test. I tried to sit quietly and think about something cheerful. I closed my eyes, took deep breaths, and imagined a relaxing scene. Just the sound of rain or the warmth of the sun. My heart rate slowed and I felt a little calmer. Then I opened my eyes and looked at the painting. The man's face looked peaceful. His eyes seemed a bit softer and the lines around his mouth weren't so harsh. I let out a shaky laugh, but it wasn't funny. It felt bizarre to see the direct reflection of my mood. I sat there for a while watching him watch me. It's been over a month since I bought this painting. I haven't told anyone the full story. Nobody would believe me anyway. I feel stuck with it. I'm too afraid to get rid of it, but I can't ignore what's happening. Every day I wake up with a knot in my stomach. I look at the door to the living room and I feel a wave of nausea. My head hurts when I think about it for too long. Sometimes I place a blanket over it, but then I feel uneasy, like I've done something wrong. I lift the blanket and then there it is staring back at me, always changing, always locked on. My emotions, I've tried rationalizing it. Maybe the brush strokes are so detailed that different angles and lights create illusions, but that doesn't explain why it lines up so perfectly with how I feel. I've also considered that I might just be losing my mind, but I know I'm still functional. I go to work, talk to people, pay my bills. The only thing that's off is this painting. I keep telling myself I'll throw it away next week, or maybe sell it back to the antique store, but every time I think about it I feel a chill in my body. My hands start shaking, my chest tightens. It feels wrong, like I'd be abandoning part of myself that scares me more than anything else, so I'm stuck with it. Every night I see its face, every morning I feel its gaze. I haven't found a single clue about the painter. There's no Signature, no label, nothing. It's as if it just appeared out of nowhere. I don't know if it's cursed or possessed or something else. I don't even care what the explanation is. All I know is that it's tied to me now. I can't deny the connection. It's absorbing every bit of my anger, my sadness, my fear, and it gives it all back to me reflected on that man's face. I wish I could say I've gotten used to it, but I haven't. My chest still tightens whenever I step into the living room. My eyes burn from lack of sleep. My hands sweat when I think about all the possible outcomes, but I keep it there on my wall. I guess that's my life now. I bought this painting and it feels like it owns me. I don't have the nerve to break that link, and so I sit here night after night trying to keep my emotions in check, because I know the painting is always watching, and that's the truth. I can't make it sound pretty or poetic. It's just the constant reality I face. It's here and I can't let it go. I arrived at the mansion on a Monday afternoon. I remember the rough gravel under my boots when I walked up to the main entrance. The mansion stood in front of me with tall stone walls and narrow windows. It looked cold even in daylight. The owner was waiting by the door. He was a quiet man, thin with pale skin. He explained the job requirements without wasting time. He wanted me to catalogue the books in the large library on the second floor. That was it. I asked about the rest of the house, curious about all the locked doors in the corridor. He only told me to focus on the library and not to wander anywhere else. Then he pointed toward the end of the main corridor. There was a heavy wooden door reinforced with thick chains. He looked straight at me and said, "Do not touch that door. The silence of that room must not be broken." He didn't offer any details. He just gave me a key for the library, said I could stay in the guest room at the other end of the hall, and that was the end of our conversation. During my first day, I explored the library. It was larger than I expected, with shelves that reached the ceiling. The smell of dusty pages made me cough a few times. I noticed there were old lamps on the tables and a single tall window on the far side. I spent most of that day scanning the shelves, writing down titles, sorting them by category. My plan was to organize everything in a methodical way so the owner could find his books without trouble. The owner didn't bother me again. He stayed somewhere else in the mansion. I didn't see him after he gave me a quick tour. I assumed he preferred his solitude that evening. I walked down the main corridor to my guest room. I passed by the chain door. I slowed down when I heard a faint shuffle behind it. My body went rigid and I stopped in front of it for a moment. I felt a draft of cold air slipping through the gap at the bottom. The chains rattled a little and I thought maybe the wind moved them. I stepped closer and tried to hear more, but I only caught a dull thump from inside. My heart beat faster and I felt sweat under my collar. I glanced around, saw nobody, and continued to my room. The bedroom was small with a narrow bed, a small dresser and a single lamp. I locked the door, undressed, and lay down. I couldn't sleep right away. My mind kept going back to that noise behind the chains. The owner told me not to approach that door, but I'd already broken that rule, even if just for a moment. The next morning I woke up early. I walked back to the library. The corridor was silent and dim. I glanced at the chain door again, but it was still shut tight. My chest felt tight thinking about what I heard the night before, for I shook that feeling off and focused on the library. I had a job to do. I catalogued books for most of the day, pausing only for a quick lunch. The house remained quiet. Sometimes I heard faint creaks above me, but old houses always make random noises. I tried to brush off any anxiety. I told myself it was just an ordinary old mansion and that door was probably some storage room. But on my third night I heard something different. I was walking back to my room carrying a stack of my notes when I heard a muffled voice or whisper from behind the chain door. It stopped me in my tracks. My hands tightened around my notes. I heard it again, like a low murmur, and then a scraping sound like nails on wood. The air felt cold against my face. The hairs on my arms stood up. I breathed quietly, trying to listen. Then I heard a soft tap, tap, tap on the door. I leaned toward it, my stomach twisting. A chill ran down my spine. I couldn't make out words, just a soft sound that felt like it was calling me. I checked the corridor behind me, but I was alone. I backed away from the door, went into my room and locked it. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I lay on the bed staring at the ceiling. I tried to convince myself I was just tired. Maybe it was a draft pushing something against the inside of the door, or maybe pipes in the wall, but I couldn't relax. I stayed awake for a long time, feeling uneasy about that quiet voice. The days passed, and I spent most of my time in the library. Every time I left, I could feel the presence of that door at the end of the corridor. Even if I didn't look at it, the owner didn't show up often. Sometimes I heard him in another room rummaging around, but he never came to the library. During my work hours at night, I heard noises from behind the chain door, scratching, as soft knocks, and occasionally a low moan. The corridor felt colder each time. My curiosity grew, but so did my fear. The tension in my stomach made it hard to eat. I felt worn out, and my hand sometimes shook when I picked up a stack of books. After 2 weeks, I was almost done organizing the shelves. I had stacked the final pile of books on one of the reading tables. That was when I noticed the corridor outside had gone silent. I stepped out and found no light except the faint glow of my lamp. I walked toward my room, but the air felt even colder than usual. When I reached the chain door, I heard a loud thump from inside. I jumped back, my chest tightened, and I felt my palms sweat. I dropped my lamp, it hit the floor and went out. I fumbled in the dark, trying to pick it up. My breath grew rapid and my heart pounded. I relit the lamp and held it up to see the door. The chains were still wrapped around the handle, but they seemed looser than before. The sound inside was gone. I stood there for a minute listening. I heard nothing except the thud of my heartbeat. I couldn't sleep much that night. My mind kept replaying that loud thump. I thought about leaving the mansion the next morning, but I had a contract also. I had personal pride in finishing what I started. I told myself I'd only be here a few more days. Still, the possibility of looking behind that door lingered in my thoughts. The owner's warning echoed in my head. The silence of that room must not be broken, but it was already broken. I had heard whispers, scraping, and thumps. I had felt cold drafts creeping under the door. By the next afternoon, I was finishing the final shelves. I looked up at the library window and saw the sky growing dark. I had lost track of time. My stomach growled. I realized I hadn't eaten much, just some bread. Hours earlier, I grabbed a flashlight from my bag and stepped out into the corridor, planning to head to the small kitchen I had access to. When I passed the door, I felt a strong chill around my ankles. The scratching returned louder than before. I heard a slow scrape, scrape, scrape. My throat felt dry. My heart started to race, and I found myself standing there, shining my flashlight at the door. The chains rattled slightly. I noticed something odd. The padlock on the chains had fresh scratches on it. They weren't there before. They looked deep, like someone had tried to tamper with it. I held my breath. My eyes burned from not blinking. I thought I heard a faint whisper again, but it faded after a few seconds. I forced myself to keep walking to the kitchen. I tried to eat, but my appetite was gone. I drank some water and tried to calm down. I splashed water on my face, dried off with a towel, and went back to the library to finish. My mind drifted to that door. Every few minutes I forced myself to catalogue a few last books. Around midnight, I told myself I'd done enough for the day. I walked back toward my room. The door was on my right. I noticed something shining on the floor near it. I crouched down and found a small key lying on the stones. It was old and corroded. I picked it up and held it in the light of my flashlight. I had no idea where it came from. My hands felt shaky. I suspected it belonged to the chain's padlock. I stood there gripping it, uncertain if I should test it. My heartbeat felt too strong. The corridor seemed darker than usual. I told myself I'd check the lock just to see if it fit. My hand trembled when I brought the key to the padlock. It slid in. I felt a click. My shoulders tightened and I froze. I didn't turn the key. I just tested if it fit. I stepped back, my mind racing. I felt beads of sweat on my forehead. My breathing turned shallow. I stared at the door. Remembering the owner's warning, part of me wanted to turn that key and open the door. Another part of me wanted to drop it on the floor and run to my room. I decided I wasn't ready to face whatever was behind it. I placed the key on a small table nearby and went straight to my room. I locked the door behind me. My heart wouldn't slow down for a long time that night. I barely slept. Around 3 in the morning I jolted awake. I realized I wasn't sure if I had really heard something or if I was dreaming. I listened carefully. I heard a slow scrape from the corridor. The boards creaked. Then I heard the padlock rattle. My throat went dry. I waited, but the sound eventually stopped. My hands felt clammy. I stayed in bed, eyes wide, until dawn started to light the window. In the morning I forced myself to continue my work. I gathered my notes and arranged them so I could finalize the catalog. I told myself I'd finish tonight and leave tomorrow. I felt uneasy, but I pushed through my tasks. By late afternoon I had everything neatly compiled. The library looked organized. I glanced at my watch. It was around 7 in the evening. I heard a sudden series of thuds in the corridor. I rushed out. My flashlight beam bounced along the walls as I ran. The chain on the door was shaking violently. Something inside was pulling or pushing against it. My skin prickled. My heart hammered in my chest. I yelled hello. I got no response, just more rattling. Then it stopped. I stood there for a few seconds, breathing hard. My legs felt weak. I thought about the owner's words, but I also felt I had to see what was inside. I picked up the small key from the table. My hand trembled and my mouth felt dry. I approached the door, trying to steady my breathing. My mind was screaming that I should turn around and leave, but the rattling had stopped. The air felt dense. I reached for the padlock. My hand shook. I slid the key in. I tried to swallow, but my throat was tight. I turned the key. I heard a click. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it was echoing in my ears. I grabbed the chain and pulled it free. The door itself was still closed. A wave of cold air drifted across my shoes. It felt damp. My eyes locked on the handle. My hand hovered over it. I felt my breath turn shallow again. I pushed down on the handle and the door creaked open. A few inches inside it was pitch black. The smell of musty air rushed out like the inside of an abandoned cellar. I heard nothing at first. Then I thought I caught a quiet shuffle. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness. I saw a small stone room with walls stained by damp. There was a wooden chair in the corner. No windows. The floor was uneven. I stepped inside, 1 foot first, my body tense. I caught a flicker of movement to my left. I jerked the flashlight around. I saw an old blanket in the corner bunched up. Something was under it, shifting slightly. My hand shook and my breathing quickened. I heard a faint wheezing sound. I wasn't sure if it was my own breathing or something else. My heart pounded so hard my chest felt tight. I stood there uncertain if I should step closer. My foot scraped on the floor and the blanket twitched. I froze. My mind felt numb with fear. I forced myself to say, "Is someone there?" A hiss came from under the blanket. It was a small, sharp sound like air escaping through clenched teeth. I saw a thin hand emerge from the edge of the blanket. The skin looked pale and gaunt with long nails. My hands trembled so badly my flashlight beam jerked around. I took 1 step back. The blanket slid off, revealing a figure hunched against the wall. I saw an arm, a shoulder, and a wild tangle of hair. I couldn't see the face clearly, but I heard raspy breathing. Then the figure turned toward me. I saw eyes glinting in the flashlight beam. My stomach lurched. I felt like my chest was constricting. The figure let out a low moan and reached a hand toward me. I backed away until I was against the door frame. I wanted to run, but my legs locked. The figure dragged itself forward a few inches. I heard nails scraping the floor. My throat felt parched. In a cold old sweat trickled down my neck. The figure raised its head, and I saw a thin face, sunken cheeks, and wide eyes. I had no idea how this person got here. I felt the urge to speak, but no words formed. I heard the hiss again, and the figure tried to stand. It stumbled, leaning on the wall. I heard laboured breathing. In another moan. It sounded weak, not angry. I backed up more until I was in the corridor again. My flashlight still pointed inside. The figure shielded its eyes from the light with one hand, then it let out a rough cough. I shook myself out of my shock. I felt an overwhelming need to else to do. The figure kept coughing, stumbling in the dark. My heart felt like it was about to explode. My flashlight slipped in my sweaty palm. I could see the figure's features now, definitely a person, but with a haunted expression. I thought about the owner's warning again. I wondered if I should lock this door back up. My mind was spinning with questions. Why would someone be locked up in here? Why the warnings about silence? I couldn't find answers in that moment. I knew I couldn't handle more. My thoughts were too chaotic. I pulled the door shut, slid the chain back around the handle, and locked the padlock again. I heard the figure inside slump against the door with a dull thud. My breath came in uneven bursts. I dropped the key back on the table and backed away. My heart pounded in my ears. The corridor felt colder than ever. The short hairs on my arms stood on end. I walked to my room with stiff legs, my thoughts in a frenzy. Once inside, I locked the door and collapsed on the bed, staring at the ceiling. I felt my pulse pounding in my temples. I had seen a person in there, or something close to one. I stayed awake for hours trying to calm down, but I kept replaying the scene. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I felt overwhelmed and confused. I wondered if I should call someone, but I had no idea who. The owner seemed absent. The phone in the mansion was in the owner's study, which he kept locked. My personal cell phone had no signal out here in the countryside. I was on my own, at least for the night. At some point I realized there were no more scratching sounds or whispers. The corridor was quiet. I didn't hear any tapping on the door. I didn't hear any chain rattling. The silence felt heavier than the noises ever did. I don't know if the figure inside the room was still there, but I sensed a presence that kept me on edge. I tried to stay calm and plan my departure. As soon as morning came, I told myself I would pack my things, collect my fee if the owner appeared, and leave. I felt no urge to stay. I had done the job. The books were catalogued. I lay there in my clothes thinking about that last sight. The figures I stayed in my mind. They looked desperate, confused, or maybe afraid. I didn't understand the situation. My gut twisted. My limbs felt weak. My face was damp with sweat and my throat felt scratchy. My breath trembled. I closed my eyes, but I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing that hiss in my head and the wheezing sound. I felt pinned to the bed, paralyzed by uncertainty. Eventually I must have drifted off. When I woke up, the sun was shining through the window. The mansion was silent. I got up, gathered my belongings, and hurried toward the front door. I didn't check that chained room again. I only glanced at it from a distance. The chain was still in place. I thought about the key lying on the table. I wondered if I should leave it there or hide it, but I was too anxious. I took my bag, opened the mansion's front door, and stepped outside. The gravel crunched under my boots. The fresh air felt better than anything I'd experienced in weeks. I noticed the owner's car was gone. I had no way to tell him I was leaving, but I didn't care. I was done. I closed the door behind me, walked to my own car, and drove away. I'm not sure what was behind the owner's warning. I only know that the silence in that room was broken and something inside was alive, or at least breathing. I still feel uneasy when I think about it. My nights are plagued by that rasping sound, that hiss in those eyes, but I completed the job. I got out and I never planned to return. I checked into this old hotel because my job sent me on a long assignment and I needed a place to stay that wouldn't destroy my budget. I didn't care about the peeling wallpaper or the slow elevator at first. I just wanted a bed and a hot shower, but on my first night I heard noises in the room next to mine. It sounded like someone dragging heavy furniture across the floor. It didn't make sense because it was well past midnight. I got out of bed, pressed my ear to the wall and listened. The scraping sound got louder, then stopped abruptly. That's when I realized nobody else was supposed to be staying on this floor. I woke up the next morning feeling uneasy. I tried to shake it off. Work was hectic and I had too many reports to write. I left the hotel in a hurry and returned late that evening. As I walked down the hallway, I noticed the light fixtures flickering. The corridor felt colder than before. I glanced at the door of the room next to mine. It looked normal. The dark wood was chipped, but there was no visible sign that someone was inside. That night the noise returned. I heard a low thumping, like footsteps dragging across the carpet. Then I heard the dresser drawers opening and closing. At least that's what it sounded like. I grabbed my phone and checked the time. It was 2:14 in the morning. My heart was pounding. I tried to calm myself by thinking maybe the room had finally been rented out, but a part of me remembered the front desk manager mentioning that most of the floor was empty. There weren't many guests in the hotel at all. Still, I gave myself a logical explanation. Maybe they didn't bother to update me on new arrivals. The next day at breakfast, I casually asked the young man behind the reception desk if the room next to mine had a new occupant. He tilted his head and answered that he didn't see any record of that. Then he checked the computer. He confirmed that nobody had reserved any room on that floor except for me. He even joked, saying I had the entire floor to myself. I pretended that I was only curious because of the noise, but he just shrugged and said it might be the old pipes. I left it at that. That night I went to bed around midnight. I was exhausted, but I couldn't sleep properly. Every small sound made me tense. My body felt stiff, like I was ready to jump out of bed at any moment. At around 1:30 a.m. I heard it again. This time it was louder. It sounded like the nightstand was being pulled across the floor. I pictured someone pushing furniture around for no reason. The steady scraping made my stomach twist. I got up and stood by the door for a minute. I thought about going into the hallway, but I felt a strange hesitation in my chest. My hand shook when I reached for the doorknob. Eventually I opened my door. The hallway was dim. Most of the lights were on some kind of energy-saving timer, so only every other bulb was lit. I stood outside my room in my socks, listening. The sound was definitely coming from the room next to mine. I approached the door. I could feel cold air near the handle. I knocked softly. At first no answer. I knocked louder. Still nothing. I leaned in and tried to hear any movement inside. The noise had stopped. The quiet felt overwhelming. My skin prickled. I felt like someone was standing behind me watching, but the hallway was empty. I waited a moment longer, then I returned to my room. I didn't sleep much that night. Every small creak from the building made my heart race. In the morning I called the reception and asked again about that room. I was annoyed at this point. I wanted a real explanation. A different clerk answered. He told me the same thing. Nobody was staying there and the door should be locked. He insisted there must be a mistake. I sighed and asked if I could get a different room, maybe on another floor, but they said everything else was booked because of an event in town. I had no choice but to stay put. Over the following few days the noises continued. Sometimes I heard footsteps, other times I heard doors closing. I even thought I heard faint whispering, but the scariest moments came when the sounds just stopped all at once, leaving a heavy silence. My nerves were shot, my head hurt all the time. I was always on edge. I started working later and later because I dreaded returning to the hotel. One afternoon I got back earlier than usual. It was only around 6 p.m. I decided to check out the hallway in the evening light. I wanted to see if there was anything strange about the door itself. I walked over and jiggled the knob. Locked. I put my ear to the door and listened. Nothing. I felt a chill creep over me, like the temperature dropped near that door. My skin tightened and the hair on my arm stood up. I thought I heard a faint exhale from inside, but I told myself it was the ventilation system. That night I sat on the edge of my bed waiting for the usual noises. Around midnight I heard a faint tapping, like something tapping on a window or a door frame. Then it went quiet for a bit. An hour later I heard heavy movement again. It sounded like someone walking with a slight limp. I waited until I was sure it was coming from that room. I grabbed my jacket, stepped into the hallway and approached that door. For some reason the door knob was now slightly turned. The door stood open. A crack, a cold draft brushed my face. I peered inside. My eyes took a moment to adjust. It was pitch black inside. I reached to flick on the light switch near the door frame, but nothing happened. I took a single step inside. The floor felt uneven, like the old carpet had lumps in it. I sensed a figure moving in the darkness, but I couldn't make out any shape. I froze. My heart hammered in my chest. I backed out of the room and let the door close on its own. I realized my hands were shaking. I ran back to my room and locked the door. My body felt hot, but my arms and legs were trembling. My stomach hurt from the look, like anyone had used this room in a long time. The manager commented that there were no signs of a break in. The windows were locked from the inside. The air smelled stale, like no one had opened a window in years. The guard flipped open the closet door and shone his light inside. Empty. He checked the bathroom, also empty. There wasn't even running water in there because the faucet made a gurgling sound, and then nothing came out. The manager shrugged and glanced at me. He suggested maybe I heard noises through the walls because of the old plumbing or the heating ducts. I stayed silent. My stomach felt uneasy, but I had no concrete evidence to argue. They left and I returned to my room. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. Around 3 a.m. I heard the footsteps again, slower this time, like a person pacing back and forth. I put my pillow over my head and tried to ignore it. I dozed off at some point, but I had a restless sleep filled with tension in my shoulders and neck. I woke up with a headache in dark circles under my eyes. The days passed in a blur. Work was miserable because I was tired and on edge. My performance suffered and my boss noticed. I told him I wasn't feeling well. He didn't push for details, but he suggested I try to find somewhere else to stay. I agreed, but the problem was that every other hotel in the area was full. There was a big convention happening that week and the entire city was packed. I had no choice but to remain in this place for at least a few more nights. One evening I decided to have a few drinks at a nearby bar before returning to the hotel. I hoped it would help me sleep. It was close to midnight when I made my way back. The lobby was quiet except for a single desk clerk playing with his phone. He looked bored. I rode the elevator up and stepped Into my hallway. The light was flickering again. The corridor was cold. I walked to my room, but I felt drawn to the neighboring door. It looked like it was slightly open again. I swore under my breath I didn't want to check it. I didn't want to see anything that would make me panic, but my curiosity got the better of me. I stopped in front of the door. There was a bitter, chilly air coming from the gap. I placed my hand on the door and felt something like a soft vibration, like a muffled hum. My heart pounded. I stood there for a few seconds, my mind torn between walking away and pushing the door open. I decided to open it just enough to look inside. The room was dark as always. I tried the light switch again and nothing happened. I slowly stepped in. The air felt colder than the hallway. The smell of dust and old fabric was thick. My eyes strained to see anything. Then in the corner I saw a shape move. It was just a quick shift in the darkness. I heard a soft scraping sound on the carpet. I stumbled back, nearly losing my balance. My breathing turned shallow. I couldn't see a face or any details, but I knew something was in there watching me. I froze. I couldn't decide whether to run or to confront whatever it was. My body felt locked in place. Then the shape moved again, and I heard a soft whisper. I couldn't make out words, just a faint breathy sound. That was enough for me. I turned and rushed out the door, letting it swing shut behind me. I knew nearly slammed into the wall in my hurry to get to my room. Once inside, I locked the door. My heart was pounding so hard that I thought I might get sick. I paced around, rubbing my temples and trying to calm down. I kept thinking about calling the front desk again, but what could they do? They had already checked that room once. I doubted they would find anything new. I decided to turn on every light in my room. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. The noises from next door didn't start up right away, but I felt tense, waiting for something to happen. My skin felt clammy every time the building made a creak. I jumped around 2 a.m. I heard a single loud scrape against the adjoining wall. It sounded like something heavy was pressed against the wall between our rooms. The noise lasted for about 2 seconds and then stopped. My entire body tensed. I grabbed my phone, looking at the time, wondering how long this was going to go on. I thought about leaving the hotel right then and there, but I had nowhere else to go. I felt stuck. I hardly slept that night. When the sun came up, I felt a small wave of relief. I got dressed quickly and checked out of that floor for the day. I took the elevator down and spent the morning in the lobby sipping coffee and pretending to read emails. My mind was racing with thoughts about what was happening, but I kept coming back to the same feeling. Something was in that room and wanted me to know it was there. It never answered me. It never approached me directly. It just made sure I knew it existed. By late afternoon, I still had no solution for where else to stay. I dragged myself through another workday. Each time I glanced at the time, I felt dread, knowing I would have to return to that floor around 8 p.m. I came back to the hotel. As I stepped off the elevator, I felt cold air rush past me. The hallway lights were dim. I stared at that door, expecting it to be open again, but it was shut. I didn't hear any noises. I walked to my room and went inside. I left the lights on, set my suitcase on a chair, and sat on the bed. I waited, heart pounding, for the next sign of movement, but it stayed quiet for most of the night. I managed to doze off around midnight, but I was still on edge at around 3 a.m. I woke up suddenly. I wasn't sure why. My room was silent. I listened carefully. No scraping, no footsteps. I got up and checked the hallway through my peephole. Everything looked still. I opened the door a crack. The corridor was empty. The door next to mine was shut. I felt a strange sense of relief mixed with lingering tension. I decided to walk over to it. One last time. I don't know why I thought that was a good idea. I just had a weird urge to confirm it was locked. I reached for the doorknob. It felt cold. I twisted it slightly and it didn't budge. Locked, no sound from inside. I let go and took a step back. That's when I felt a soft thump against the other side of the door, like something leaned into it. My heart hammered so fast that I felt it in my ears. I stared at the door for a few seconds, my hand trembling. I whispered hello, hoping for some kind of explanation, but I got nothing in return. I backed away from the door and returned to my room. I closed the door quietly, locked it, and got back into bed. I stayed awake until morning. My body felt tired, but my mind wouldn't let me rest. I felt sure that whatever was in that room had no intention of leaving, and for some reason it wanted me to be aware of it. It never harmed me, it never even showed itself fully, but it found a way to invade my mind, making me question every sound and every shadow. I decided then that I would leave this place as soon as I could find another hotel. I wasn't about to stay any longer than I had to. I'm still here for now, packing my things and getting ready to check out in the morning. If that means driving around until I find a last-minute motel, I'll do it. I've had enough of this floor. I don't know what's in that room, but I know it's there. It doesn't want company, but it made sure I wouldn't forget it, and that's enough for me. I'm done. I'm not going to knock on that door again. I'm not going to call the front desk. I told myself it was just the old decor. I found the men's locker room. It smelled like damp towels in old plastic. The benches were made of chipped wood and the lockers had rusted corners. I changed into my swim trunks and put on my goggles and cap. I noticed a small poster on the wall about water safety, but it looked like it had been there for decades. The corners were curled and part of the text had faded. I made my way to the pool area. The air felt heavy with chlorine and the overhead lights gave everything a dull grayish look. I glanced around and saw a few staff members at the far end of the pool near a small office with a window. They whispered among themselves, then looked away. When I walked in, there were no other swimmers in the water. The pool was completely empty. The water rippled slightly as though someone had just finished a lap, but I saw nobody else. I stepped to the edge of the pool. The water appeared clean enough in the brightly lit area, so I ignored the rumors I had heard earlier. People said that late at night the water got murky and strange sounds echoed through the area. One staff member had joked about hearing heavy breathing. I had shrugged it off. I didn't believe in any of that. I just wanted a quiet place to work on my freestyle. I slipped into the water. It felt cold against my skin, not the usual chill I expected from an indoor pool, but something that made my muscles tense right away. The smell of chlorine was strong and my eyes stung a bit. Despite the goggles, I started swimming laps at a calm pace. My arms cut through the water and I tried to focus on my form. After a few laps I found a rhythm. Everything felt normal and I relaxed. Maybe 30 minutes later I paused for a break at the deep end. My heart pounded a bit and I took a moment to catch my breath. The overhead lights hummed and I noticed a faint dripping sound coming from somewhere near the walls. The water was still around me. Then I felt something brush against my foot. It felt like a hand or maybe a loose piece of equipment. I recoiled and kicked instinctively, but nothing was there. I glanced around trying to see if anything had drifted near me. The water looked empty. My stomach tightened. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I slowly moved to the ladder and climbed out of the pool. My hands shook a little as I wiped the excess water off my arms. I tried to act calm in front of the staff members who were still at their station. I didn't want to look paranoid, but my heartbeat was still racing. I considered leaving right then. Instead, I decided to sit on a bench at the side of the pool to settle myself. After a few minutes, I told myself it was just my imagination. Maybe it was a patch of cold water or my own leg moving in a strange way. I forced myself to get back in and continue my laps. The rest of the session went by without any other odd sensations, and I left the club that night feeling a bit unsettled but determined to return. I didn't want to let a weird feeling ruin my training. The next evening I came back. The moment I walked in, I heard the staff whispering again. This time one of the guys near the front desk told me that the water had looked hazy after closing the night before. He said he heard a faint sound like gasping or panting. He joked about it, but I could tell he was uncomfortable. I shook my head and tried to shrug it off. I didn't want any more strange ideas in my mind. I changed and walked out to the pool again. The place seemed normal enough, though I noticed a chill in the air that wasn't there before. The overhead lights flickered a bit more, creating brief moments of dimness. I slipped into the water. At first I swam without incident. My strokes felt smooth and I focused on my breathing techniques, but after several laps I stopped to adjust my goggles. I glanced toward the deep end. I thought I saw a slight disturbance in the water, like a ripple moving on its own. Nobody else was swimming and there was no vent or jet in that spot. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. My hands felt clammy against the pool's edge. I tried to ignore it and resumed my laps. As I dipped my face under the surface, I caught a glimpse of something moving at the bottom. It looked like a dark shape drifting or swaying. I stopped again and stared for a few seconds, but the water was still. My heart thumped hard and I felt a knot in my stomach. I told myself it was the reflection from the overhead lights, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had seen something real. I wrapped up my session and headed home. That night I had trouble sleeping. My mind replayed the moment something brushed my foot. My dreams were disturbing. I saw myself swimming in black water. I couldn't see any walls or floors. Everything was just pitch black liquid, and then I felt cold hands gripping my ankles, pulling me down. I woke up gasping for air. My skin was covered in sweat. Despite my anxiety, I went back the following day. The staff members told me more stories. They mentioned hearing odd echoes, sometimes like a person exhaling slowly under the water. One person claimed she saw splashes in the pool after hours when no one was inside. I tried to act casual, but inside I felt shaky. I usually trained in the late evening because it fit my schedule. That night the light seemed dimmer than usual. A faint draft made the air feel colder. I noticed my own footsteps echoing down the hallway. When I stepped onto the pool deck, the water looked slightly cloudy, not crystal clear. I dipped my hand in and the temperature felt lower than usual. I slid into the water hoping some exercise would calm my nerves. I pushed off the wall and started freestyle. My breathing was uneven and I kept glancing around underwater. Every time I turned my head to breathe, I felt a surge of tension. The water seemed heavier. Somehow my arms felt tired more quickly and my chest tightened as if the air around me weighed on my lungs. I finished a lap, paused at the shallow end and wiped my eyes. I decided to do one more lap. As I reached the deep end, I kicked off the wall to head back. That was when I felt a sudden shift in the water behind me. It wasn't my wake. Because I had paused to turn, it felt like someone else had just pushed off. My blood ran cold, my pulse hammered in my temples, and I swam faster. I forced myself to reach the other side without looking back. When I arrived at the shallow end, I stood up quickly. Water dripped off my face. I scanned the pool. It was empty. The overhead lights cast a weak glow, and I noticed the staff had left the pool area. I was alone. I backed out of the water slowly, my legs shaking. I grabbed my towel and left without showering. My hands trembled as I unlocked my car door. I drove home with my mind racing. That night the nightmares got worse. I saw myself in total darkness again, swimming without any sense of direction. The water felt like ice and my lungs burned from lack of air. Then I felt those cold hands on my wrists, this time tugging me down. I couldn't scream, and all I heard was a muffled gurgling sound. When I woke up, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst. I decided to change my schedule and train in the morning. I told the staff I needed a fresh routine. They looked at me with curious expressions but didn't say much. On my first morning session, the pool felt different. The sun was out, brightening the glass ceiling above the water. The air felt warmer and the water looked clearer. I relaxed a bit, thinking the daylight would make everything normal, but while I swam laps, I caught myself glancing to the sides every few strokes. My mind wouldn't let go of the idea that something was in the water. A few times I felt small shifting currents that made me think of a person swimming close by. I stopped and looked around. A couple of other people were in the pool at that hour, so I told myself the currents came from them. Still, I couldn't relax. My shoulders were tense and my breathing was shallow. During the next few mornings, nothing major happened. I started to think maybe it was all in my head. However, I kept having short flashes of that uneasy feeling whenever I dipped below the surface. Sometimes I caught a slight shadow in the corner of my vision. Other times I thought I heard a faint scraping noise against the pool tiles. Once I felt a small tug on my leg, but when I spun around, it was just the lane divider floating near me. My heart still raced every time. My sleep wasn't great. I woke up most nights drenched. I heard a loud drip from one of the showers. The sound echoed in the quiet space. I changed, then headed out to the pool deck. The water's surface was motionless, and for a second it looked almost inviting. The sunlight was coming in through the high windows. I breathed in and told myself it was just another morning. I swam for about 15 minutes without anything odd. I started to think I might have a normal session. Then when I stopped at the wall for a quick rest, I heard a noise near the deep end. It sounded like a single breath, almost like someone had surfaced for air. I turned my head, but the pool was empty. My arms tensed and my stomach felt hollow. I stared for a while, waiting for a sign of movement. The water was still. I debated whether to keep swimming or leave. I pushed off the wall and tried to finish another lap, but my stroke felt shaky. Halfway across, I felt a wave push against my legs. It wasn't big, but it was enough to throw off my rhythm. I coughed and swallowed a mouthful of chlorinated water. My throat burned. I stopped and grabbed the lane divider for support. I scanned the surface again. Nobody was near me. I heard my heartbeat in my ears. I forced myself to keep going and reached the other side. Then I hoisted myself out of the pool, panting. My arms and legs felt weak. I sat on the edge for a moment, trying to catch my breath. I decided that was enough for the day. I toweled off, got dressed, and walked out. The staff at the front desk asked if I was feeling okay. I gave a short nod and left without explaining. I drove home, my hand still shaking on the steering wheel. My clothes felt damp against my skin, and my mind kept replaying the sound of that single breath. I kept up my morning schedule for a while longer, hoping the strange events would fade. They didn't. Every time I entered that building, the air felt stale and uncomfortable. The water always seemed a bit too cold. I caught small glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, and I heard brief echoes that sounded like someone exhaling. My night stayed restless, with recurring dreams of being pulled beneath the surface. I'm still going there, but I can't relax. Each time I dip my head underwater, I brace for something to brush against my foot or grab my arm. I can't ignore the tightness in my chest or the shiver that runs through my body when I see those tiny ripples forming without a clear cause. The staff members keep telling the same stories. They shrug it off as old pipes or draft events. I wish I could say I found a logical reason for all of it, but I haven't. I don't see any proof. of a person in the water, yet I feel a presence, the cold spot around my feet, the fleeting shapes at the bottom, the quiet exhalations that echo at the wrong moments. None of it goes away when I leave. I feel a knot in my stomach that lingers for hours. At night I wake up breathless and sweating with the memory of that suffocating black water on my mind. But I keep going back. I keep hoping it's just a trick of the old pipes or some quirk of this aging building. I hope that maybe on one of these mornings I'll swim my laps and feel fine, yet every time I step onto the pool deck the cold air washes over me, and I remember the rumors. I remember the feeling of something brushing my foot. I remember the shape I thought I saw underneath me. I remember the breath I heard when nobody was there, and deep down I know I'll never see this place the same way again. I saw the diary on a Wednesday morning. It was on the small wooden table in the far corner of the library. That spot was mine for weeks. I liked the silence there because nobody ever bothered me there. Librarians rarely passed that area. I sat down and noticed a worn black notebook with a plain cover. I didn't see anyone leave it. It was just there. I picked it up and flipped through the pages. At first I saw random words about rituals in hidden chambers. Then I realized the handwriting changed every few pages, like different people had taken turns writing. Some pages looked neat, others were messy with deep erratic pen marks. I felt a tightness in my chest when I read a section that described a dark place under the ground. It mentioned long tunnels and weird symbols carved into the walls. I shut the diary and looked around. The library was quiet. A few people sat at desks nearby, but nobody seemed to be watching me. I had this strange feeling in my stomach, like I shouldn't keep reading, but I was curious. I flipped to another page and saw another style of handwriting full of scribbles in the margins. It talked about a ritual that required certain steps and repeated chanting. I couldn't make sense of it. I closed the diary. My palms felt sweaty. I took a deep breath. I walked over to the main desk and handed it to the librarian. She glanced at the cover, shrugged, and said she'd put it in the lost and found. She didn't ask any questions. I nodded, then walked out of the library. My head felt cramped. I tried to push the diary out of my mind. That night I had trouble sleeping. I kept picturing those tunnels the diary described. I saw myself walking with a torch heading down some narrow passage. I didn't see anyone with me. I just heard my footsteps echo in the dark. The walls were damp and cold. I saw strange markings like letters from an unknown alphabet. I woke up around 3 a.m. covered in sweat. My heart pounded and I felt like I'd run a marathon. I got up and checked the time on my phone. My legs were shaky. I drank some water, tried to calm down, and forced myself back to bed. The next morning I returned to the library at my usual time. The table in the corner was empty again. I sat down, set out my notebooks, and tried to study. A few pages into my reading I noticed something black sitting behind a pile of old magazines at the edge of the table. I reached over and pulled it out. It was the same diary. I recognized the worn edges and the scuffed cover. My stomach dropped. I looked around confused. I had given it to the librarian the day before. Maybe they placed it here by mistake, but why would they put a lost item right where I usually sat? I decided to bring it back to the front desk again. The same librarian was there. I explained that I'd found the diary again at my seat. She stared at me with a blank expression and took it without a word. I returned to my table and tried to focus on my notes. My mind kept wandering. I felt like someone was messing with me. When I got home that evening, I found weird scribbles on the last page of my notebook. They looked like the symbols I saw in the dream. They weren't neat or orderly. They were jagged, almost like I pressed the pen too hard. I didn't remember writing them. My hand felt sore, like I'd been gripping a pen for too long. I Sat there confused and unsettled. That night my dreams got worse. I saw the same underground passage, but this time I heard dripping water. The torch flickered and I saw shapes in the distance. I couldn't tell if they were people or just shadows. My chest felt tight and I could barely breathe. I ran my fingers along the wall, was feeling the cold stone and the strange engravings. My back tensed up and my shoulders HDHD. I turned a corner and saw a large iron door with symbols carved into it. My head started to pound. I tried to stop looking at it, but my eyes wouldn't move away. Then I woke up gasping for air. I felt like I'd been holding my breath in my sleep. In the morning I noticed more of those odd marks now on the edges of my study notes. I couldn't figure out how they got there. I felt a dull pain in my hand again, like I'd been writing all night. My nerves were raw. I needed answers, but I also felt uneasy about going back to the library. Still, it was my usual routine. It was where I got most of my work done. Around noon I walked into the library and went straight to my corner table. At first I didn't see the diary. I relaxed a bit. I spread out my notes, took my pen and tried to focus on the tasks I had for the day. After about an hour I stood up to stretch. When I turned around I saw the diary on the chair next to mine. I almost dropped my pen. I felt a surge of panic. My skin tingled and my stomach clenched. I grabbed the diary. This time I opened it again. The pages were familiar, but now there were new scribbles in the margins. I saw partial sentences in the same style as the marks I found in my notebook at home. I felt my heartbeat speed up. I couldn't find a single explanation for how this thing kept showing up. I walked back to the main desk. My voice shook as I tried to keep calm. I told the librarian that the diary appeared near me again. She gave me a confused look and said she didn't recall seeing it earlier. I asked if I could look at the lost and found log or something to confirm it had been turned in. She said they didn't keep a detailed log for small items like that. I felt stupid. I thanked her and left the diary with her. Once more I spent the rest of the day trying to focus on other things, but every time I blinked I pictured that tunnel, the iron door and those symbols. My hands felt clammy all day. When I got home I immediately checked my notebooks. I saw more fresh scribbles along the sides of my notes. My entire body tensed. I didn't remember writing those. I slammed the notebook shut and tried to distract myself with a TV show, but I couldn't concentrate that night. The dreams came back. This time I could smell the damp air in the tunnel. It smelled like wet stone and old moss. My footsteps echoed. The torch crackled. My throat felt tight. I walked deeper and deeper. At one point I realized I was tracing the symbols on the wall with my fingertips. My hand tingled. My breathing grew heavy, like the air was thicker down there. When I finally woke up I was covered in sweat. My pillow was damp. My heartbeat pounded. I had trouble catching my breath. I lay there for a few minutes staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of all this. The next day I went to the library again. I considered skipping it, but I felt drawn there like I had no other choice. My legs felt heavy as I walked through the doors. I didn't look at the librarian. I moved straight to my corner. The diary was on the table. I grabbed it immediately. I flipped through the pages and until I reached a part one hadn't read before. It described a large chamber under the earth full of carved pillars and more symbols. It mentioned a group of people dressed in dark robes standing in a circle. There was a reference to chanting. The lines were shaky, like the writer's hand was trembling. I didn't want to read more, but I felt compelled to. The next page had large symbols drawn in black ink. The edges of the page were frayed. Something about this felt wrong. I shut the diary, breathing fast. My skin felt hot. I tried to steady my heartbeat. I heard my own breathing echo in my ears. For a moment I felt like I was back in that tunnel. My hand shook. I put the diary in my backpack. I didn't want to leave it there anymore. I wanted to get rid of it for good. Maybe if I threw it in a trash can somewhere far away, it would stop appearing near me. I walked out of the library. My steps hurried on the way home. I kept checking over my shoulder. I had the sense that someone was following me, but every time I turned around, nobody was there. My palms were sweaty. I felt this knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. I noticed people on the sidewalk giving me odd looks. I realized I was breathing heavily, almost panting. I tried to slow my breathing, but my chest was tight. When I got home, I set the diary on my coffee table. I walked around it like it was a dangerous animal. Then I picked it up, opened it one more time, and tried to see if there was any clue about who wrote it or how I could contact them. I saw no name or address. I did notice a small detail I hadn't caught before, a faint stamp on the inside cover that said property, but the rest was smudged out. I took a pen and scribbled over the mark, hoping to reveal something underneath. Nothing, just old black ink. I decided to throw the diary away. I walked outside, found the big trash bin behind my building and tossed it in. I heard it land on top of some loose garbage. Then I slammed the lid. I stood there for a few seconds, my heart still racing. I felt a small sense of relief. I told myself I was done with it. That evening I tried to review my notes, but I felt too anxious. I kept checking the door to my apartment. I felt like the diary would come sliding underneath. Somehow it was an irrational thought, but I couldn't shake it. My arms felt weak and my eyes were tired. When I finally managed to fall asleep, I had the same nightmare. This time it was worse. I felt the walls of the tunnel closing in my back. Scraped against damp stone, my breath turned shallow. I saw the torchlight flicker on more of those bizarre symbols. My chest HD. I thought I was going to collapse right there. When I woke up, my right hand was cramping. I looked around and saw I had scribbled more weird markings on a piece of scrap paper I kept by the bed. They looked like the ones in the diary. My head throbbed with confusion and exhaustion. I barely had the energy to stand up. I considered skipping the library altogether that day, but I had no quiet place to go. My apartment was cramped and my neighbors were noisy. Against my better judgment, I made my way there in the afternoon. The moment I stepped inside, I felt a chill. The library's air conditioning was always on, but this felt different. As I approached my usual corner, my heart started pounding. The diary was there, resting on top of my usual chair like it was waiting for me. My chest tightened, my vision blurred a bit. I felt a wave of dizziness. I almost turned around and left, but something in me wanted to see if there were more entries. I picked it up and checked the pages. There were new notes. Someone had scrolled short lines on the back pages. I recognized my own handwriting. It was the same rushed script I'd seen in the scribbles at home. My hand shook as I flipped through. There was a fresh passage that described the iron door in greater detail. It mentioned that once you open the door, there's no turning back. It also mentioned a path that leads into a deeper chamber. The words sounded frantic. My breathing grew shallow. I felt my pulse hammering in my neck. I realized I might have written those words in my sleep or during one of my exhausted moments. I had no memory of doing it, but the handwriting matched. My mouth went dry. I shut the diary and felt a tremor in my arms. I didn't know what was happening to me. I left the library in a hurry. I could feel the stares of the few people sitting there, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get out. For the next few days I stayed away from the library. I told myself I could study in a cafe or in my apartment with noise cancelling headphones. I tried everything to distract myself. I kept the lights on at night. I drank coffee to avoid sleeping too long, but I still had short bursts of nightmares whenever I dozed off. Each time I saw those tunnels, I felt the cold stone under my fingertips, and each time I woke up with more scribbles around me. On the fifth day I realized The diary was on my kitchen counter when I got home. I never brought it here. I had thrown it away. My head pounded when I saw it. My first thought was that I was losing my mind. My second thought was to open it and see if anything else had been added. Sure enough, there were more notes in my handwriting. They described a final passage leading to a hidden ritual site. I slammed the diary shut and felt my heart race. My hands were shaking so much that I dropped it. It landed on the floor with a dull thud. I picked it up and flipped to the front again. The older entries were still there, describing the dark place underground, the chanting, the weird group in robes, but I could feel my perspective shifting. It was like I was part of that group, or at least something was pulling me in that direction. My forehead felt damp with sweat. My pulse pounded in my temples. I paced around my kitchen. I wanted to destroy it. I wanted to set it on fire, but I felt afraid. Part of me worried something worse would happen if I tried. My breathing was shallow. My eyes were burning with exhaustion. I put the diary inside a drawer and slammed it shut. I sat on my couch feeling shaky and uncertain. That night I had another nightmare. I was in the tunnel again, but this time I was near the iron door. My palm was pressed against its surface. It felt cold and rough. I noticed my own scribbled notes on the stone around the door frame. My hand started to turn the handle and the door creaked open. I felt a deep pounding fear in my chest. Then I woke up so fast that I almost fell off the bed. My heart hammered and my throat was dry. I could taste bile at the back of my mouth. I realized I'd been grinding my teeth. My jaw HDHD. Now whenever I close my eyes I see that door. I see the torchlight flicker. I feel my hand on the metal handle and I don't know what happens if I walk through. I don't want to find out, but I keep feeling a pull to return to the library, to open that diary again, to see if there's some final entry that explains it all. Every time I try to resist, I end up picturing those symbols in that cold dripping tunnel. My hands tremble just thinking about it. I'm telling this story because I don't have anyone else to tell. I don't know how this diary keeps appearing. I don't know why I'm writing in it without remembering. I only know that these nightmares leave me exhausted and these strange scribbles keep showing up wherever I go. I feel like I'm always on edge, waiting for something to jump out from behind a bookshelf or appear in my apartment. I still go to the library. Sometimes the diary still shows up. I return it to the front desk, but it always finds a way back to me. I've stopped trying to explain it to the librarian. She just stares at me like I'm wasting her time. Now I keep it in my desk drawer at home, locked away, hoping that maybe it will stay put, but a small part of me knows it won't. That's all I can say. I'm living with this strange cycle, uncertain if I'm doing these things to myself or if the diary has some power I can't understand. My body feels tired all the time. My eyes burn, my hands ache, but the dream tunnels keep calling me. And the diary keeps finding me. I don't know how to break free. I just know that every day I wait for the next page to fill itself, and every night I brace for the same suffocating darkness to swallow me again. I got home last Friday with an old piece of sheet music under my arm. My friend, a fellow musician, had handed it to me earlier that afternoon. He didn't say much about it. He just shrugged and said he found it in a pile of stuff he bought at a flea market. He said it looked like something I might enjoy. I thought it was just another random score. I had no idea it would make my living room feel colder than it ever had before. I'm an amateur pianist, so I'm used to leafing through old manuscripts and trying out new tunes. I like the musty smell of old paper. I don't mind the faded ink or the occasional notes scribbled in the margins by past owners, but that day when I took the sheet out of the folder I noticed something strange. The pages looked worn and brown at the edges, but the ink was still dark and crisp. There was no title, no Composer's name. The measures seemed normal at first, quarter notes, half notes, rests, but near the end of the first page I saw some symbols I didn't recognize. They didn't look like any standard dynamic marks or accents. They looked like odd scratches in the staff. I placed the sheet music on my piano stand. That evening I turned on a small lamp by the piano. The yellow light flicked a bit, which I thought was just the bulb needing replacement. Then I started playing. The first measures were calm, the chords fit together well, and the melody was soft. As I moved to the second page I heard a faint buzzing in my left ear. I paused and rubbed my ear, then I kept playing. I noticed the chords started to clash. They didn't sound like experimental jazz or anything I'd heard in modern compositions. They sounded harsh and uncomfortable. I started feeling the hair on my arms rise, and I was only on the third page. I took a short break. I got up from the piano bench and drank a glass of water. I felt my pulse. It was fast and my forehead felt damp. I kept looking at the sheet music on the stand. The symbols on the corners of the page seemed to shift under the lamp's light. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I switched on the overhead light in the living room to make sure I could see properly. The symbols didn't move then, but I still felt uneasy. I sat back down and placed my hands on the keys. Again my fingers felt rigid and I had a slight tremor. I tried to ignore it. I started playing from the fourth page. The notes sounded jarring. My foot on the pedal picked up strange overtones like echoes. The piano seemed to vibrate more than usual. I glanced around the room. The walls looked darker even with the overhead light on. I heard a slight draft from somewhere, but I had closed all the windows. The temperature felt different, like a sudden chill. I forced myself to keep going. My shoulders tensed and my breath felt shallow. I could hear my own heartbeat. The music got faster with more of those strange symbols. My hands felt like they were digging into the keys. The chord sounded broken, but I kept following the notation. Then out of nowhere I heard a low hum, almost like a distant horn. I stopped playing for a second to check if it came from outside. When I paused, the room went silent except for the faint buzz in my ears. I decided to push through and finish the piece. I had this urge to see where it led. As I reached the last measures on the final page, I felt the air in the room turn icy. My breath came out in short gasps. My eyes teared up from the cold. My left hand cramped and I nearly messed up a chord. I kept going. There was a sensation on my neck like someone was standing right behind me. I wanted to turn around, but my hand stayed on the keys. The piano's volume seemed to swell as if invisible strings and brass were accompanying me. I could swear I heard more instruments, but there was no one else there. Then the music ended with a single sustained note. I pressed the key and held the pedal, waiting for it to fade. The echo from the piano lingered. It didn't just fade away, it pulsed a bit in the room. I felt my chest tighten. I let go of the key and just sat there. My arms were stiff and my fingers were cold. The overhead light flickered once, then stayed on. I stood up slowly. My back hurt. My head felt heavy. I looked at the sheet music. It was lying there on the stand, but now it seemed thicker. I noticed more pages at the back that I hadn't seen before. I flipped through them. They were blank at first glance, but then I saw fresh notes forming on the paper like ink bleeding in from beneath. I watched, mouth dry, as new measures took shape. I couldn't believe it. The new pages looked old as well, with the same dark ink and the same strange symbols. I stepped back and bumped into the piano bench, nearly falling. My heart pounded. I closed the piano lid and gathered the pages in a stack. I slid them into a drawer, hoping that would stop whatever was happening. I forced myself to turn off all the lights and go to bed. I felt my muscles ache and I just wanted to sleep that night. I woke up a few times at around 2 a.m. I heard something. It was faint, but I recognized the pitch. It was the piano. I sat up in bed listening. The notes were the same dissonant chords from the final pages of that strange piece. They repeated in a slow pattern, then paused, then repeated. I felt my pulse speed up. I rubbed my eyes and got out of bed. The hallway was dark, so I turned on the light. The switch clicked, but the light took a second to come on. When it did, it was dimmer than usual. I walked toward the living room. The piano keys were moving on their own. The lid was still closed, but the sound came from inside. My heart thumped. I lifted the lid expecting something mechanical, but nothing was there. The keys pressed down by themselves, playing that unsettling chord progression. The sheet music was still in the drawer, so it wasn't out in front. I stood there frozen. My arms felt heavy. I leaned over and slammed the lid shut. The sound stopped abruptly. I opened the drawer and checked the sheet music. It was there exactly where I had put it. I flipped to the end. More lines were filled in than before. I stared at them for a long time, but I couldn't make sense of them. They looked like normal notes except for those odd symbols scattered around. I closed the drawer, went back to bed and lay awake until morning. My mind replayed the chord progression. My body felt sore and I struggled to get comfortable. I considered calling my friend and asking if he knew anything about this, but I didn't want to sound crazy. I also didn't want to bring more attention to the score. Part of me wanted to burn it, but I was afraid of what might happen if I did. In the morning, I tried to focus on regular life. I ate breakfast, tried to read some emails, and thought about going out for a walk, but the living room felt tense. I kept glancing at the piano. I noticed a draft that seemed to come from behind it, but there was no vent there. The air near the piano felt colder than the rest of the apartment. I approached it and touched the keys. They felt like ice. I pressed one lightly, and it produced a soft tone that lingered in my ears longer than it should have. I looked at the drawer. I could hear a faint rustling sound like paper shifting. It sent a tremor through my chest. I decided to play a few notes on a different piece just to see if everything was okay. I grabbed a well-known Chopin waltz, but my hand shook and the piano sounded out of tune. The notes wavered. The resonance was off. I stopped after a few measures. My skin tingled and I felt the chill again. I sat on my couch for a while, not sure what to do. My phone buzzed. It was my friend asking if I'd looked at the sheet music yet. I texted back that I did and asked him where he got it. He just said it came from an old estate sale and that the seller didn't mention anything special. I wanted to say more, but I stopped. I didn't want to explain what was happening through text. I spent the afternoon trying to ignore the piano. I left the apartment and went for a walk. I grabbed a sandwich at a small cafe and tried to clear my mind, but my head felt heavy and my appetite was gone. On the way back, I felt this dread in my chest. I thought about sleeping somewhere else for the night, but my stuff was all at home. I decided I'd just keep the drawer locked and stay out of the living room as much as possible. That evening I turned on the TV in the bedroom and turned up the volume. I wanted to drown out any sound from the piano, but around 10 shy p.m. I heard that same humming noise. I muted the TV and listened. It was soft, but it was definitely coming from the living room. It rose and fell like an eerie chant. I felt goosebumps on my arms. I left the bedroom light on and walked down the hall. When I reached the piano, I saw the drawer was open slightly. A corner of the old sheet music was sticking out. I hadn't touched it since the morning and I was sure I'd closed it. My throat felt dry. I knelt down and pushed the drawer shut, but it wouldn't close all the way. There was some force keeping it open. Then the humming stopped. The living room went quiet, but the cold air made me shiver. I looked at the corners of the ceiling and the walls. I didn't see anything unusual, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was there. I stood and stared at the piano for a full minute. I felt this urge to pull the sheet music out and play the new pages. It was like an itch in my brain. I wanted to know what would happen if I continued. Maybe the music would end in some release, or maybe it would make the cold go away. I hesitated, my stomach churned, my heart pounded. I crouched down, gripped the drawer handle, and opened it fully. The papers rustled, more lines of notes had appeared. The lines were uneven, like they'd been scrawled in a hurry. My eyes locked onto them. I felt a tightness in my chest. The composition was longer now, at least 3 more pages than yesterday. I set the pages on the piano stand and flipped through them. The notes seemed chaotic, dissonant intervals lined up measure after measure. The strange symbols were more frequent. They looked angular and sharp, placed above certain chords. I placed my hands on the keys and tried the first measure of the new section. The chord sounded thick and unpleasant. My head throbbed. I stopped. I couldn't do it right. Then I closed the lid again. I didn't sleep well at night. The temperature in the apartment dropped even more, and I used 2 blankets. I woke up with stiff joints and a headache. In the morning I found the piano lid open. The bench was pulled out slightly. The sheet music lay on the stand. Even though I'd left it in the drawer, my stomach flipped when I saw it. I realized I had to make a choice. Either I would play the entire composition and see what happened, or I would try to get rid of it somehow. But I remembered the moment the new pages appeared on their own. I didn't feel confident that burning or throwing it out would solve anything. I decided to call my friend. I needed him to see this, but he didn't answer. I left a voicemail asking him to call me back as soon as he could. Then I paced around the living room for a while. The apartment felt too small. The corners were dim. Even with the lights on, the piano looked like it was waiting for me. My hands shook. I took a deep breath and opened the drawer again. The pages were all there, fully notated. I set them on the stand. I adjusted the bench. I felt my arms tingle and a wave of nausea hit me, but I placed my fingers on the keys. I started from the beginning again, hoping to push through the entire thing in one go. The first pages were the same as before. My heart raced. My shoulders tightened. The atmosphere in the room grew heavier by the measure. By the time I reached the newer sections, I felt a drop in temperature. I kept playing. The new chords were dense. My fingers stumbled a few times. My breath came in short gasps. I heard the same echo from the walls, like instruments joining in. My vision blurred, but I didn't stop. The sound built up and pounded in my head. Finally I reached what looked like the last page. The final chord stretched across 3 staves loaded with accidentals and strange markings. I pressed the keys as firmly as I could. The vibration rattled the lamp next to the piano. Then the chord faded. Everything went still. I lifted my hands, breathing hard. My legs shook. The room stayed cold, and I listened for any sign of the humming or the hidden orchestra, but it was silent. I looked at the pages. No new lines appeared. It was over. I slid the stack of pages back into the drawer and closed it. My fingers tingled. The overhead light in the living room glowed a bit brighter than before. I walked away from the piano feeling elated. I left the apartment shortly after that and stayed out until it got dark. When I got back, the living room felt normal again, though the cold spot near the piano lingered. I haven't tried playing the piece again. Sometimes I still hear faint notes in the middle of the night, but they're softer now. The pages haven't changed since then, and they stay locked in the drawer. I don't know if I'll ever touch them again. Sometimes I feel tempted. Sometimes I wonder if the music will keep growing if I give it another chance, but I stay away because each time I look at those pages I remember how my hands felt numb and how the air turned ice cold around me, and that's all the reason I Need to leave it alone. I never thought my nights would be filled with whispered conversations from an empty stage. I just wanted to help out at the old municipal theatre. It looked sad from the outside. The walls showed signs of water damage and the front doors creaked. People said it was a place with a lot of history, but they also said it was almost forgotten. They needed volunteers to clean and lock up. I signed up because I had free time and I felt like a space like that deserved some care, even if it didn't draw big crowds anymore. I didn't expect to hear voices in the basement after dark. I didn't expect to see strange shapes in the dressing room mirrors. I definitely didn't expect my nerves to fray each time I turned out the lights. I've been doing this volunteer job for a few weeks. My main tasks are sweeping the floors, cleaning the dressing rooms, and making sure all the doors are locked at night. On weekends I come in the early afternoon and stay until around midnight. Sometimes there are small recall, maybe a speech or a local choir rehearsal, but not much more than that. Most of the time the place is quiet and empty. That's what I liked about it. At first I liked the idea of being alone with the sound of my own footsteps on the old wooden stage. The seats are musty and the curtains have a dusty smell, but I found something comforting about it. Then I started hearing things. The first time I heard the voices was on a Wednesday evening. I was finishing up in the orchestra pit, making sure there were no stray cups or papers from the few people who had used the space earlier in the week. I heard a murmur that sounded like a single person speaking. The sound carried up from the basement or maybe from somewhere behind the stage. I froze, thinking maybe someone had entered without me noticing. I listened carefully, but I only caught a few faint sounds. I walked over to the side door and peeked into the hallway that leads to the basement. There was nobody there. The door to the basement steps was closed. I listened again. Nothing. My heart thumped in my ears, but everything was quiet. I shrugged it off and got back to work. I thought maybe it was a trick of the old pipes. A few nights later I was in the main lobby sweeping. It was around 9 p.m. and the place was empty. The overhead lights in the lobby are weak and the corners stay in shadow. I heard the voices again, clearer this time. There were at least 2 voices, maybe 3. They sounded upset, like they were arguing. I couldn't make out words, but I heard a strained tone like frustration or desperation. My chest felt tight and my palms got sweaty. I set the broom aside, walked to the top of the basement stairs and flipped the light switch. The hallway below looked dim. The fluorescent light flickered for a moment before settling. I stood there listening. I heard one of the voices again, but it was so faint I couldn't be sure if it was real or my imagination. I took a few steps down, each stair creaking under my weight. When I reached the bottom, the smell of mold was heavy, but something else blended in, something like old flowers that were left out too long. I looked around. The hallway was empty. The utility room door was open a crack. I nudged it open and saw nothing but old chairs and boxes. The voices had gone silent that night. I locked up, feeling uneasy. I stayed by the front doors for a minute before leaving, just staring back at the dark interior. My mind kept the top of the basement steps with my phone outstretched, hoping to capture even a word or a phrase. Nothing but garbled audio. I could almost make out a few whispered words, but they were too distorted. It made me frustrated because part of me wanted proof I wasn't losing my mind. One night I checked the stage area for any signs of intruders. I found nothing. After that I went into the dressing rooms. There are about 6 of them backstage, each with a wall of mirrors surrounded by old yellow bulbs. Most of those bulbs don't work now. As I walked into the second dressing room, I felt a chill run down my arms. I paused, trying to see if there was a after or a broken window. Nothing seemed out of place. I stood in front of the mirror, about to clean the surface with a rag. Then I saw something move in the reflection. I jerked my head around, but the room was empty. No one was behind me. I looked back at the mirror and for a split second I saw a shape. It was a dark silhouette, like a person standing where the costume rack is, but that area was empty. My stomach twisted and my heart started pounding in my hands went cold. Then it was gone. I dropped the rag and went out into the hallway. My breathing was quick and my thoughts were jumbled. I tried to steady myself by checking the other rooms. I kept seeing odd flickers in the mirrors, quick movements that vanished when I turned my head. I wanted to finish my tasks, but I couldn't stop thinking about the voices in the basement and the shapes in the mirrors. I forced myself to keep cleaning. My throat felt dry and my jaw stayed clenched. Each time I saw a flicker, I almost jumped. I tried to tell myself it was the lighting or my eyes playing tricks on me, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Over the next few days I noticed an odd pattern every time I heard the voices. I also smelled that mix of mold and dried flowers. It was a faint stale scent, but it always showed up right before the voices started. Then I'd see a quick movement in the corner of my eye or a reflection in one of the mirrors. The silhouettes in the mirrors never matched my own reflection or anything else in the room. They moved like people on stage, gesturing or turning. I'd see a hand raised or a head tilt, like someone was rehearsing lines or reacting to someone else's dialogue. It made me feel tense all the time. My stomach felt tight and I couldn't relax even when I was just sweeping or changing light bulbs. After 2 weeks of this, I decided I couldn't just ignore it. I thought about telling the building manager, but we hardly ever see him and I wasn't sure what I'd say. I keep hearing voices in the basement and I see shadows in the mirrors, but there's no one there. That sounds ridiculous. Instead, I tried to gather more evidence. I went out and bought a small digital voice recorder, something more sensitive than my phone's mic. I hid it in different spots near the basement steps, in the dressing rooms, even on the stage. The recording still came out distorted. Sometimes I could hear faint murmurs or a quick hiss, but it was never clear. During one of these late-night searches, I stood on the stage staring out at the empty seats. My flashlight beamed past over row after row of worn chairs. The balcony was pitch dark. The curtains on either side of the stage were half open, and they moved slightly as if a breeze passed through, but there was no breeze. My arms got goosebumps and I felt a prickly sensation on the back of my neck. Then I heard a voice right behind me. It was soft, but it had an urgent tone. I whipped around with my flashlight, shining it everywhere. Nothing. My heart was racing so fast that I felt a little elated. I forced myself to breathe slowly, but every time I inhaled, I smelled that stale flower scent. I climbed down from the stage and hurried backstage, not bothering to finish my cleaning. That same night I had trouble sleeping. I kept seeing the shape in the mirror whenever I closed my eyes. I felt like my apartment was too quiet, too different from the theater. I wished I had something normal to focus on, something that could wipe the memory of that whispered voice from my head. The next day I told myself I had to be more systematic about it. I took a small notebook to the theater, planning to write down every time I heard the voices or saw something odd. I spent most of the afternoon vacuuming the lobby carpet. Around 5 p.m. a small group came in to rehearse a choral arrangement, so there were real voices in the building for a few hours. That made me feel better, but by 8 p.m. They left and I was alone again. I sat in the main auditorium on the edge of the stage writing in my notebook. I noted the time, the date, and how the building felt. At first it was just quiet. I heard normal creaks from the old structure. I walked backstage around 8:30 and checked the dressing rooms. The mirrors were empty, no weird shapes. The smell was just dust in old paint. I felt a bit relieved, like maybe it was over. Then around 9:15 I was locking the back doors leading to the alley. I heard the voices again, this time coming from the corridor near the basement. They sounded strained, like actors in the middle of a tense scene. My ears picked up more than one person, 2 or 3, maybe more. My heart pounded and my hand shook a bit on the door handle. I wrote down the time in my notebook. Then I went to the basement door. I stood there gripping my flashlight, trying to decide if I should go down again. My throat felt tight. The hair on my arm stood up. I opened the door and flipped the switch. The light flickered. The voices grew quieter but still audible. They were definitely down there. I forced myself to walk down the stairs. Each step creaked. My breaths were shallow and I could feel sweat beating on my forehead. The smell hit me halfway down, mold in that stale flower scent. I swallowed hard. The hallway was still and dimly lit by the single fluorescent tube. I moved slowly, checking the storage rooms. Nothing. I followed the corridor to the far end where an old locked door leads to a crawl space. The voices seemed closer there, like they were right behind the door. I leaned in and pressed my ear to the wood. The voices were clear enough to make me think real people were on the other side. I grabbed my key ring, though I knew I didn't have a key for that door. It's always been off limits. The building manager told me not to worry about it. I jiggled the handle, locked. I considered knocking, but my hand trembled at the thought. My heart pounded. The voices were so close, but I still couldn't make out exact words. They sounded agitated, aided. My palms felt clammy, and I realized I was gripping my flashlight so tightly that my knuckles were sore. I stepped back, trying to catch my breath. Then the hallway went silent. No fading out, no gradual quieting, just silent, like someone flipped a switch. The stale flower smell was overwhelming, so I moved away, trying not to breathe it in too deeply. My pulse was racing. My mouth tasted like metal. I felt dizzy. I hurried back up the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. I made it to the lobby and tried to calm down. My heart was hammering and my legs felt weak. I dropped into a chair, resting my head in my hands. After a minute, I stood up and decided to check the dressing rooms again. I wanted to see if those reflections had changed each dressing around me. Whenever the voices started, my hands would get clammy and my heart would race. Each time my recordings failed, I only got static or faint whispers. I tried telling myself it was some old vent system carrying voices from outside or some leftover radio frequency, but the consistent timing and the sudden silence whenever I got too close didn't make sense. The shapes in the mirrors also made me question that logic. They moved like real people performing drama that I couldn't hear clearly. I started dreading my shifts. My nerves were on edge, my shoulders ADHD from being tense. I could barely sleep when I got home because I kept replaying those moments in my head, yet I kept going back. Part of me wanted to understand what was happening. Part of me felt responsible for the theater, like I couldn't abandon it. Every time I turned the key in the front door, I felt a knot in my stomach. Tonight I'm sitting here in the office taking a break before I do my final rounds. The building is quiet. I hear the hum of the old vac system. I feel a bit nauseous and there's a dull ache in my temples. I can still smell a faint trace of that stale flower scent. My phone battery is full and my recorder is ready. I'm going to try one more time to capture the voices. I'm afraid of going down those steps, but I have to know if the locked door at the end of the hallway will stay closed. I have to know if I can figure out who or what is behind those voices. My stomach clenches and my hands feel slick with sweat. I'm nervous, but I'm also determined. I'm not expecting answers exactly. I just want something on tape, something that proves I'm not imagining this. After I finish this last round tonight, I'll lock up and take a few days off. I need to clear my head. Maybe I'll talk to someone else about it, or maybe I'll decide it's better to quit. I don't like feeling this tightness in my chest every time the lights flicker, but first I have to see if I can catch them on audio. I'm not sure what I'll do if I succeed. If the recording finally works, then I'll have proof of something, but even that thought scares me. I guess I'll find out. For now, I just want to get through this shift. I'm heading down there in a few minutes. I can feel my pulse pounding. The air in here is heavy. My mouth is dry. I'm just going to swallow my nerves, grab the flashlight, and walk toward the basement door. If I hear the voices again, I'll press record. That's all I can do, one step at a time. I got home from work late that night, feeling sweat trickle down the back of my neck. My shirt was stuck to my skin and my feet felt like they were on fire. I walked straight to the bathroom. I didn't care about anything else. All I wanted was to wash off the day and try to get some sleep. My apartment felt stuffy. The hallway lights were dim. I could hear the hum of the air conditioner in the living room, but it didn't cool me down fast enough. I turned on the shower and let the water run hot. I took off my clothes and threw them in a corner. The bathroom mirror fogged up in seconds. My legs felt weak from standing so long at work, so I leaned against the tile wall in the shower, letting the water drum on my shoulders. It helped me relax, but I still felt a knot in my stomach. I wanted to pretend everything was normal, but something inside me felt off, like I was missing some detail about my night. When I stepped out of the shower, I dried off in silence. The bathroom fan buzzed overhead, and I watched steam float near the ceiling. I wrapped a towel around my waist and stepped into the hallway. The air felt cold against my damp skin. Then I saw something that made me stop. There were wet marks on the ceiling of the hallway, shaped like footprints. They stretched out along the plaster one after another, as if someone had walked upside down from the bathroom toward my living room. For a second I thought maybe water was leaking from the apartment above me, but I live on the top floor. I looked closer and realized these wet spots looked exactly like footprints. Each print was about the size of a normal adult foot. I stood there, water dripping off the ends of my hair, feeling my heart beat against my rib cage. I didn't want to believe it. I stepped into the living room, still in my towel, following the footprints with my eyes. They stopped right above the entryway to the kitchen, then faded out. My scalp tingled and I felt a chill on my arms. The wet footprints had a muddy color around the edges. I leaned against the wall, trying to think straight. I glanced at the floor, checking for water or puddles, but it was dry down there. It was only on the ceiling. The prints were definitely on the ceiling, and they looked fresh. There was a faint smell in the air, something stale and earthy. It reminded me of a pond that never got cleaned. It smelled like stagnant mud. I swallowed hard and went to the closet for a broom. I pressed the towel tighter around my waist and carefully poked at the ceiling. It was damp where the footprints were, but no water dripped down. I started to feel uneasy, but I told myself it could be some weird plumbing issue. Maybe water seeped through from somewhere else, creating shapes that happened to look like footprints. That's what I wanted to believe. I got dressed, grabbed a step stool and wiped away the prints with a rag. They came off, leaving a faint dirty residue on the cloth. I opened a window to air the place out. After a few minutes the smell faded and I thought that was the end of it. The next day I came home around the same time. I left work later than usual again because my boss demanded I finish some last-minute tasks. I turned on the living room lights and tossed my keys on the coffee table. I stopped in my tracks. When I looked at the ceiling, there were footprints again, but this time they were spread out above the couch as if someone had crawled along the surface. The odor hit me first, that same muddy, stagnant smell. The prints were wet just like before I moved around the couch to get a better view. Each footprint was about 2 feet apart. Some spots had small drops of water trailing behind them. It was like someone had stepped in a muddy puddle, flipped gravity, and walked around my ceiling. My stomach churned. I rubbed my eyes, wondering if I was losing it, but the footprints were there, as real as anything else in my apartment. I reached up and touched one. My fingertips came back wet and grimy. I wiped them on my jeans, then looked around, half expecting to see someone standing there, but my apartment was empty. I turned off the TV, which had been on standby mode, and walked around checking each room. No one was there. I thought about calling the building manager. I knew what he would say. There must be a leak somewhere, or are you sure it's not some weird condensation problem? I didn't feel like explaining footprints on the ceiling. It sounded crazy, so I grabbed my mop and a bucket of soapy water and tried to clean the area again. The smell didn't fully go away. It lingered like wet earth. My eyes started to sting from the cleaning solution, so I took a break and sat on the couch staring up at the damp patches that remained after the footprints disappeared. I sat there until midnight, feeling uneasy and tired. Eventually I dozed off. The next morning I woke up with a stiff neck, still on the couch. I looked at the ceiling right away. No new prints, just the faint marks from the night before. I got ready for work, feeling groggy and out of it. My shift dragged on, and I kept thinking about what I'd find. When I got home, my co-workers asked me why I looked so pale. I didn't tell them the truth. I just said I wasn't sleeping well that night. I walked into the apartment and flicked on the light, scanning the ceiling. Nothing in the living room. I exhaled, relieved. Then I heard a drip from the hallway. I walked over and looked up. This time the footprints were right outside my bedroom door, as if something had paced back and forth on the ceiling. The odor was strong, like rotten pond water. My throat clenched. I found myself sweating even though the air conditioning was on. I closed my bedroom door and tried to ignore the footprints. As I stepped into the bathroom, I wanted another shower, but I felt scared to stand in there alone. I kept looking up, wondering if I'd see feet dangling down. I rushed through my shower, drying off and throwing on a t-shirt and sweatpants. My hands were shaking when I opened the bathroom door again. The hallway light flickered overhead. I still smelled that stale mud. The footprints were there, mocking me. I stood on my toes and reached up, pressing my palm against the center of one footprint. It felt wet and cold, like pressing my hand into a soaked sponge. I felt my stomach twist and I yanked my hand back. I tried to wipe my palm on my pants, but the smell stuck to my skin. I went back to the sink and scrubbed with soap, but I could still catch a hint of that earthy odor. That night I left every light in the apartment on. I sat in my bedroom staring at the ceiling. I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing with possibilities. I kept hearing little sounds in the walls. It might have been the pipes or the old building settling, but it made me jump each time. I pictured a figure crawling across the ceiling, waiting for me to close my eyes. Around 2 in the morning I finally dozed off, only to wake up an hour later, heart pounding. I thought I heard something scuttling above me, like bare feet scraping on paint. I didn't get up to check. I just lay there sweating, trying to pretend I was imagining things. In the morning I walked out of my bedroom and checked the hallway. The footprints were gone. The Ceiling looked normal again except for a few faint stains that I recognized from earlier. It was a relief, but I felt exhausted and paranoid at work. I messed up simple tasks because I couldn't focus. My manager scolded me, but I just nodded and apologized. I wasn't going to explain my nightly battles with muddy footprints on the ceiling. I stopped by a hardware store on the way home and bought a stronger cleaning solution. I also picked up a cheap handheld camera. I thought I'd try recording overnight just to see if I could capture anything. When I got back, I searched the ceiling right away. No fresh prints. The apartment smelled normal. I fixed a quick dinner, trying to calm my nerves with some food. Then I set up the camera in the hallway, pointing it toward my bedroom door where the prints had appeared before. I pressed record and tried to settle into bed. Every hour or so I got up to check if the camera was still running. It was. Nothing had changed. After a while I managed to get some sleep. When I woke up I rushed to check the camera. I felt a weird excitement, like maybe I'd catch a real explanation. I played back the footage, fast forwarding through the night. It was mostly just still frames of my dark hallway. The light in the bathroom was on, casting a faint glow. Then around 3 o'clock in the morning I saw a flicker in the top corner of the screen. It looked like a quick movement, almost a shadow along the ceiling. The camera shook a bit, maybe from me walking around or from the building's vibrations, and then the image was still again. I replayed it several times, but it was too dark to make out any shape, just a blur in the corner of the frame. I checked the ceiling in the hallway. Sure enough, there were new footprints. They were faint, but they were there, running lengthwise along the corridor. I stood under them, feeling my pulse speed up. The smell of stale mud hit me again, weaker than before, but still noticeable. I tried to clean them with a stronger solution. The stains faded, but the wetness lingered. My mind raced as I wiped over each footprint, my arm shaking from the effort. I kept glancing behind me, half expecting to see something crawling out of the shadows. Over the next few days the footprints kept appearing in different areas. Sometimes they were by the living room window, sometimes near the kitchen. They never appeared on the floor, only on the ceiling. The smell got worse with each new set of prints. Each morning I had to clean them before going to work. Some days I found myself gagging from that muddy odor. I tried to open the windows, but the smell clung to the walls and the furniture. I started sleeping with the lights on in every room. I even left the TV turned on for background noise, hoping it would drown out any strange sounds. I noticed my sleep pattern was all over the place. I felt like I was losing my grip on normal life. Each night I waited, listening for movements above me. Sometimes I heard a soft tapping on the ceiling, like fingernails or toes. Other times I heard nothing at all, which almost felt worse because the silence made my imagination run wild. One night I sat upright in bed, convinced I heard water dripping onto the carpet. I jumped up and turned on every light, searching for wet spots on the floor. I found none, but when I aimed my flashlight at the ceiling I saw fresh footprints right above where I'd been lying. They were spaced so they lined up with the length of my bed. My skin crawled and my breath caught in my throat. I quickly grabbed a chair and tried to wipe them away. Water dripped onto my arm. When I touched the first print it felt cold and thick, like it had bits of grit in it. I clenched my jaw and kept wiping, determined not to let these things linger above me. When I finished, I spent the rest of the night sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for more. I felt tension in my chest, like I was bracing for a fight, but nothing else happened. Eventually I laid down, my mind too tired to stay awake. I woke up the next day with a stiff back and a dull headache. I considered breaking my lease. I thought about sleeping in a hotel for a few nights just to clear my head, but I couldn't afford that long term, and Moving would be a hassle. I kept telling myself there had to be a normal explanation, but I'd seen those footprints appear in different places, always wet, always stinking of stale mud. It made no sense. I tried contacting a plumber who checked my pipes and said everything looked fine, no leaks, no water damage. The building manager said he couldn't see any structural issues. I didn't mention the footprints, I only said I smelled dampness. I started feeling like I was being watched all the time. Some evenings I thought I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. Once I was cooking dinner and saw a shape flicker across the ceiling. When I looked up I saw nothing, but I smelled that familiar odor. I turned off the stove and didn't bother finishing my meal on a Saturday. I got a ladder from the storage unit and carefully inspected the ceiling surfaces. I tapped them, feeling for hollow spots or moisture. Everything seemed stable, no water stains except for the places where I'd cleaned up footprints. I went room to room, shining a FL flashlight along the edges. I found no holes, no cracks that might let water in. I felt my anxiety spike each time I glanced down the hallway, expecting to see fresh prints forming behind me. These days I sleep with the bedroom lamp on. My eyes burn from lack of quality rest. I can't shake the feeling that something crawls overhead while I'm drifting off, waiting for me to fully relax before it appears again. My nights blend together in a blur of IOUs, half sleep and quick jolts awake. Every so often I get up and wander the apartment, shining a light at the ceiling. Sometimes I find new footprints, sometimes I don't, but the smell is almost always there, faint and clinging to the walls. I haven't told any friends about this. I don't want them to think I'm nuts. I handle it on my own, scrubbing footprints, spraying air freshener and leaving every light on until morning. My water bill has gone up from my constant cleaning. My electric bill is higher because I keep the place lit like a hospital corridor, but it's the only way I feel even a little safe. I don't know how this is going to end. Every night I expect something to drop from the ceiling. I imagine cold, muddy hands grabbing me. Sometimes I feel a slight pressure on the bed, as if something hovered above me and brushed the blankets, but I never see anything. When I open my eyes, my body tenses up from the constant fear and my heart feels like it's hammering non-stop. I keep hoping I'll find a logical reason for this. Maybe I'll catch someone sneaking in, maybe a hidden leak will explain the footprints, but until that happens I'm stuck. Each time I step into the hallway after a shower I glance at the ceiling, half expecting to see fresh marks, and more often than not they're reminding me that something is wrong. In this place I can't sleep properly, I can't relax, I just keep going day after day, scrubbing the footprints, taking shallow breaths and wishing whatever is up there would just leave, but it doesn't leave. It waits on the ceiling inch by inch, tracking me with those wet prints and that sickening smell of stagnant mud, making it clear that I'm not alone. In my own home, I still remember the day I saw that antique clock in a dusty corner of the store. It had a worn-out face and the seller swore it worked like new. He seemed eager to let it go. At first I just thought he was trying to make a sale. Now I wonder if he knew something I didn't. I should have walked away, but I couldn't resist that quiet ticking. It pulled me in like some broken promise I hoped to fix. After I brought the clock home, I hung it on the living room wall. I tested it before leaving the shop and it seemed fine. The second hand moved normally the minute an hour hands aligned themselves without issues. The chimes rang exactly on the hour. I was satisfied and excited to show it off. That first night I didn't notice anything strange. I even found the steady tick comforting. I had dinner in the living room, glancing up now and then at the clock. It felt like a piece of history I had claimed for myself. I first noticed the odd backward movement on the second day. I was sitting on my couch checking emails on my phone. I heard a soft click from inside the clock, but I wasn't sure if it was normal. I looked up and the minute hand twitched backward by a tiny amount. It wasn't obvious, and I actually doubted my own eyes. I thought maybe I was just tired or imagining things. Still, I got up and looked closer. The minute hand seemed fine at that moment. It started moving forward again like normal. I shrugged and told myself it was just some minor glitch. Then the hour struck and the chime sounded a bit off. It had a low echo that trailed longer than usual, almost like it didn't want to stop. My skin prickled, but I went on with my day. That evening I had trouble sleeping. I heard the clock chime from the living room several times. It was spaced exactly an hour apart, so it wasn't random, but each chime sounded deeper than I remembered. I got up once to check the clock's face. The time looked right, so I went back to bed. My dreams were weird, lots of repeated scenes of me entering the living room, seeing the clock reverse, then hearing my own voice echo. I woke up sweating. On the third day I saw the minute hand pull a more obvious backward movement. I was reading on the couch and the clock was in my peripheral vision. I heard a familiar click, looked up and saw the minute hand jerk back by 1 full minute. Then it started moving forward again like it was trying to correct itself. That unsettled me. I got up, opened the glass cover and tried adjusting the hands. I turned the small knob to set the right time. Then I listened for any grinding noises. The gears looked okay, but right as I was about to close the cover, I felt a strange pulse in my fingertips. It lasted maybe half a second, like a mild electric shock, but there was no current in that area. It made my heart race. I let the cover snap shut, walked away, and tried to distract myself by washing the dishes. I glanced at the clock every few minutes. Everything seemed normal. When the clock struck noon, it let out a series of chimes that felt heavier than before. There was a low rumble behind each ring. The final ring echoed through the room. The echo floated around like it didn't want to die out. Then it finally faded. My stomach twisted, and in a knot I couldn't shake the sense that the clock was affecting the air around me. I decided to get out of the house for a while. I took a walk around the neighborhood to clear my head. I bought a cup of coffee from a local shop. I tried not to think about the clock, but my mind kept returning to the odd backward shift. By the time I got home, the house felt eerie. The living room was too quiet. The clock's ticking sounded off, like it had a slower rhythm. I approached it and it still showed the right time, but I saw the minute hand shutter. It actually stopped for 10 seconds, then jumped forward. My breath caught in my throat. I backed away and bumped into a table. My arms trembled a bit. I was scared, but I told myself it was just an old mechanism acting up. 2 hours later, I was making a sandwich in the kitchen. I heard the clock chime for 3:00 p.m. The chimes felt normal for the first 2 rings, then the third ring had that long echo again. It reminded me of the low hum you hear near large machinery, but there was no such machine in my house. The hairs on my arms stood up. I walked to the living room, stood in front of the clock and waited. I wanted to see if anything else happened. Nothing did. The minute hand kept moving forward. The hour hand was on the 3. I headed back to the kitchen, and halfway there I heard a small click behind me. I turned around and saw the minute hand jump backward again. It was subtle but unmistakable. Later that night I started experiencing deja vu. I was on the couch streaming a random show. My phone buzzed and I got up to answer a call. The caller was a friend asking about weekend plans. I remember finishing the call, setting my phone down and heading to the bedroom. Then something weird happened. I found myself back on the couch, phone buzzing in my hand, the show still playing. It was the same friend calling with the same words. It was as if time had rewound. About a minute I felt elated. I didn't tell my friend what happened. I just ended the call quickly. I stared at the clock. It showed the same time as before. The phone buzzed. My heart pounded. I felt sweat gathering on my forehead. I turned off the TV, went to bed and tried not to think about it. The next morning I woke up with a headache. I checked the clock in the living room right away. It looked okay. I went to brush my teeth, and when I came back I noticed the minute hand was off by about 5 minutes. It was behind the correct time. That meant it had moved backward during the few minutes I was out of the room. I touched the clock's frame. It felt colder than the rest of the room. My palms got clammy. I tried moving the hands forward again, but the clock resisted. The knob turned stiffly like the gears were binding. I forced it a bit and then it clicked back into place. Then it ticked normally for a while. Around midday I heard the clock chime for 12. Oh, it sounded faster this time. The first ring was normal, but the next few came in quick succession like someone had shaken the clock. Each ring had that deep echo. By the 10th ring I felt a vibration on the floor. By the 12th ring my ears felt like they had popped the way they do on an airplane. Then everything went silent. I stood there holding my breath. The silence was so intense that it made me dizzy. After a few seconds the normal sounds of the house returned, like the refrigerator hum and distant traffic noise. I felt relief wash over me, but my hands shook. I needed air. I threw on my jacket and left the house. I wandered the streets for almost an hour. I didn't really have a destination. I just didn't want to be near that clock. My mind replayed the backward movement, the quick chimes, the weird deja vu. I kept telling myself I should just get rid of it, but for some reason I felt an urge to keep it. Maybe I hoped I could fix it or find a logical explanation. I'm not sure. After a while I returned home feeling drained. That evening I realized the deja vu episodes were getting worse. I was watching a movie when a scene repeated itself. The screen didn't glitch. It was my mind that glitched. I felt like I had gone back a minute in time. I watched the same dialogue happen twice. I paused the movie, replayed the section, and confirmed I wasn't hallucinating. The lines, the clock chimed in the background. My skin broke out in goosebumps and I cursed under my breath. I paced around the living room, not sure what to do next. When midnight approached I got ready for bed. I stood by the clock waiting for the chimes. At exactly 12 it rang, and a burst of chaotic sounds. The gears inside must have spun faster. The chimes came one after the other without the usual gaps. I lost count of how many times it rang. It might have been 13 or 15 or 21. I couldn't focus. My ears rang. I felt my breath catch in my throat. My vision blurred for a moment. When the noise stopped I felt unsteady on my feet. I stumbled to the couch and sat there breathing hard. My heart pounded so loud I could hear it in my ears. That night I barely slept. I kept waking to faint sounds in the house. I heard the clock at odd hours. Sometimes it chimed at past, which it never used to do. Sometimes it chimed multiple times in a row, like it was stuck in a loop. Whenever I got out of bed to check, I would see the minute hand shifting backward, then jumping forward. It was like it was trying to correct itself, but failing. I felt trapped in my own home with this thing. My shoulders HDHD from tension. My head felt tight. I couldn't think of a rational way to deal with it. The next day I had a moment where I saw time reset right in front of me. I was standing in the kitchen about to pour coffee into a mug. I watched the hot coffee fill the cup halfway. Then I heard that familiar click from the living room. Suddenly the mug was empty and the pot was still full. The coffee beans in the grinder on the counter looked as though I hadn't used them yet. My hand shook so Much I almost dropped the pot. I felt my knees buckle. I leaned against the counter, breathing fast. It was like the last minute had been erased. I went to the living room, stared at the clock, and saw the mind hand move backward that sealed it for me. I decided I needed to take the clock off the wall and hide it. I carefully lifted the clock from its hook. The clock felt heavier than before. My arms strained. I carried it to a spare room I rarely use. I set it on a small table face up so I couldn't see the hands. Then I closed the door. My plan was to leave it there until I figured out what to do for the rest of the day. I tried to ignore the occasional chiming I heard from that room. It was distant, but still unnerving. Sometimes the chimes sounded soft and normal, other times they came in rapid bursts. My stress level stayed high, my stomach felt tight, and I kept clenching my jaw. During the night I woke up to the sound of multiple chimes going off in a row. It was around 3 a.m. I could see the time on my phone. The chiming wouldn't stop. I got out of bed, grabbed a flashlight, and walked to the spare room. I opened the door. The clock was there, resting on the table, but its hands were spinning faster than I'd ever seen. They were moving clockwise for a few seconds, then reversing direction. Suddenly, every time the hands crossed the hour, it chimed. The echo stacked on top of each other, creating a dull roar. My heart pounded. I reached for the knob to wind the clock down, but the moment I touched it, I felt a surge of static that jolted my hand. I yanked back and almost dropped the flashlight. The chimes continued, filling the space with relentless noise. I swallowed hard and went to grab a thick towel from the hall closet. I returned and wrapped the clock in the towel to muffle the sound. It helped a little. The chimes became more distant. I carried the wrapped clock into the garage. Each step felt like I was carrying a live wire. My ears buzzed and my vision felt shaky. In the garage I placed the clock on a workbench. I kept it wrapped, hoping that would dull whatever was going on inside. I stepped back, took a few breaths, and waited to see if anything changed. The noise eventually died down. The minute hand still tried to spin, but it was trapped in that fabric. I stayed in the garage for a while, just watching. Eventually the hand slowed. The chime stopped. I could hear my own breathing echo in the space. My pulse hammered in my throat. I decided to leave the clock there for the night. I went back inside, locked the garage door, and tried to sleep. My chest felt tight. My thoughts were scattered, but at least the house was quieter. By morning I woke up exhausted. I stood in the kitchen, sipping water, trying to decide what to do next. I didn't want to see the clock again. I didn't want to hear it, but I felt a pull, like I needed to check if it had calmed down. I walked into the garage. The towel was still in place, like and subscribed for 4